You are now listening to The Osbornes by E.F. Benson. Chapter 5. It was about 2 of the afternoon in the last week of May, and this sudden heat wave which had spread southward over Europe had reached Venice, making it more than ever a place to dream and be still in, and less than ever a place to see sights in. So at any rate thought its foreign visitors, for the Grand Canal even and the more populous of the waterways were empty of pleasure-seeking and church-inspecting traffic, and but little even of the mercantile or more necessary sort was on the move. Here and there a barge laden with coke and wood fuel was being punted heavily upstream, clinging as far as might be to the side of the canal, where it would feel less of the tide that was strongly setting seaward, or here another carrying the stacked-up furniture of some migratory household passed down midstream so as to get the full aid and current of the tide avoided by the other. But apart from such traffic and the passage of the grey half-empty steamers that churned and troubled the water at regular intervals, sending the wash of their slanting waves against the walls of the white palaces, and making the moored and untenanted gondolas slap the water with sudden hollow complaints, and grind their sides uneasily against the restraining parley, there was but little stir of movement or passage. No lounger hung about on the steps of the iron bridge, and the sellers of fruit, picture postcards, and tobacco had taken their wares into the narrow strip of shade to the north of the Academia, and waited, unexpectant of business, till the cool of the later hours should bring the forestieri into the street again. Even the native population shunned the glare of the sun, and preferred, if it was necessary to go from one place to another, to seek the deep shadows of the narrow footways rather than face the heat and glare of the canals, and the boatmen in charge of the public ferries had moored their craft in the shade if possible, or, with heads sheltered beneath their discarded coats, passed the long siesta hour with but little fear of interruption or call on their services. The domes and towers of the town glittered jewel-like against the deep blue of the sky, and their outlines trembled in the quiver of the reverberating air. On the north side of the Grand Canal the southward-facing houses dozed behind lattices closed to keep out the glare and the heat, and the air was still and noiseless but for the staccato chiding of the swallows which pursued their swift and curving ways with nothing of their speed abated. Over the horizon hung a purplish haze of heat, so that the edge of the sea melted indistinguishably into the sky, and Alps and Euganean hills alike were invisible. Dora had lunched alone today, for Claude had gone to Milan to meet his father and mother, who were coming out for a fortnight and would arrive this evening, and at the present moment she was looking out from the window of her sala onto the lower stretch of the Grand Canal, which, as her intimacy with it deepened, seemed ever to grow more inexplicably beautiful. The flat which they occupied was on the south side of the canal, and though no doubt it would have left the room cooler to have closed all inlet of the baked air, she preferred to have the windows open, and lean out to command a larger view of the beloved waterway. Deep into her heart had the magic of the city of waters entered, a thing incomparable and incommunicable. She only knew that when she was away from Venice the thought of it caused her to draw long breaths, which hung fluttering in her throat, that when she was in it her eyes were never satisfied with gazing or herself with being soaked in it. She loved what was splendid in it, and what was sordid, what was small and what was great, its sunshine, its shadows, its moonlight, the pleasant Italian folk, and whether she sat in the jewelled gloom of St. Mark's or shot out with the call of her gondolier from some dark waterway into the blaze of ivory moonlight on the Grand Canal below the Rialto, or whether the odor of roasting coffee or the frying of fish came to her as she passed some little cafe restaurant in the maze of mean streets that lie off the Masseria, or whether she lay floating at ease in the warm sustaining water of the Lido, or watched in the church of St. Giorgio the mystic wreaths of spirits and archangels assembled round the table of the Last Supper, peopling the beamed ceiling of the upper chamber and mingling mist-like in the smoke of the lamp with which it was lit. She knew that it was Venice, the fact of Venice, that lay like a gold thread through these magical hours, binding them together, a circle of perfect pearls. 2 threads indeed ran through them all. They were doubly strong, for it was in Venice last autumn that she and Claude had passed 3 weeks of honeymoon, and with the glory of the place was mingled the glory of her lover. It was that perhaps that gave to details and such sights and sounds as were not remarkable in themselves their ineffaceable character. It was because she and Claude had wandered, pleased to find themselves momentarily lost in the high-eaved labyrinths of narrow streets, that the dingy little interiors, the trattorias with their smell of spilt wine, and their vine-leaf stoppered bottles, their sharp savour of cooking and sawdust-sprinkled floors were things apart from anything that could be seen or perceived in any other town in the world. A spire of valerians sprouted from mouldering brickwork, the reflection of a marble lion's head on snow-white cornice quivered in the grey-green water below, little sideway scuttling crabs bustled over the grey mud of the lagoons, bent on private and oblique errands of their own, seagulls hovered at the edge of the retiring water. Grey-stemmed parley with black heads leaned together, marking the devious course of deep-dug channels. There came a cry of starley, and a gondola with high-arching neck. Some beautiful black swan shot out of a canal by the bridge where they lingered, and these sights and sounds, trivial in themselves, were stamped in her mind with the royal mint-mark that belonged to those weeks when she and Claude were in Venice after their marriage. Her emotion had streamed from her, soaking them with it. They were part of Venice, part of herself, and so wholly hers. Some seal had been set on those things then that could never be melted out. It was Claude who had set it there, and he had so imprinted that seal upon Venice that to her now all that was Venice had the memory of her honeymoon upon it like a hallmark on silver. That time had been a score of divine days, luminous with the southern sun, warm with stillness or clement wind, and yet made vigorous with the youth and freshness of the immortal sea. And here, 6 months afterward, she had returned with Claude to spend a month of late May and early June before the weeks of London. In the autumn she had come home under the enchantment, and by way of a neat Christmas present Mr. Osborne had prospectively given her the rent, the journey, the expenses of food and wine, the servants and their journeys and their wages of a month. Or call it 5 weeks, my dear, and you won't find me pulling you up short, he had said, of that house on the Grand Canal that took your fancy, Palazzo, but there, I've no head for foreign names. You leave London, you do, with your maid and your cook, and your housemaid and what not, and don't forget Claude, hey? Or he'll be quarrelling with you, and me taking his side too, though it's only my fun. And you take a few English servants with you, as you can fall back upon, and you send me in a bill for all the tickets and the wages, and your living bills, and your gondolas, and that's my Christmas present to you. Don't you bother, but make yourself comfortable. You go as you please, as we used to say, for a month, or call it 5 weeks, and enjoy yourself, and let me know how much it's all stood you in. I shouldn't wonder if Mrs. O and I didn't come and join you, not to make you uncomfortable, no fear, but to take another piazza, palazzo you call it, and have a look at the Italians, and see what's to be seen. Dora had an excellent oral memory, and as she sat at her window today, watching the flickering reflection in the water of the sun-struck houses opposite, she could almost hear Mr. Osborne's voice saying these hospitable and free-handed things. But they did not get between her and her memory of the weeks in October. She was aware that during the last 6 months she had seen things differently to the way in which they were presented to her during those weeks, but it was not Venice that had altered. It was still Venice as per last October, as her father-in-law might have said. They had rowed out to Malamocco one day, and another they had gone to Torcello, the ancient mother of Venice, and she had found there a sort of tenderness for the earlier and now ruined and fevered town, just as she found a tenderness for her husband's mother. Torcello was the beginning of the magic. From Torcello the creation of what she so loved had come. On another day they had taken dinner out on to the great lagoon, had tied up to a clump of hoary grey-headed parley, notching the ferro of their gondola into the disk of the setting sun. Then some tide had slowly swung them a little sideways, so that they still faced toward the brightness of the west, long after the sun had gone, and the glory of its departing had been infused into and flooded the heavens. A great cumulus cloud reared itself out of the western horizon, in tower and pinnacle of ineffable rose, with transparent aqueous blue dwelling in the folds of it, and at the base of it lay the campaniles and roofs of Venice. And Claude had been beside her, he whose beauty intoxicated her, so that she interpreted all he said or did through the medium of that. He had often yawned at things that engrossed her, he had often felt that long lingering before certain pictures was tedious, but his reason for it had ever been the same, and the reason was an intoxicating one. Then pictures and campaniles absorbed her, and in consequence he, so he complained, got the less of her. "Put me down in Clapham Junction," he had said once, "and if I find you there I shan't ask for Venice." Tintoret. Yes, number 20 is by Tintoret. How did you guess? I see no label on the frame. They should have them all labeled. What a handsome frame! On another day, the only one on which the halcyon weather had played them a trick, they had gone out in the morning to Burano, rowing at full tide over the shadows and water of oily calm, with above them a sky that was turquoise, but for a few pale combed wisps of cloud. Northward it had been very clear, and the white range of snow mountains so sharp cut that it seemed that even on an autumn day they could row across and ascend those cliffs of white. Then Claude had noticed at first a great tattered edge of grey vapour streamed southward off the Alps, and spread with the swiftness of spilt water along the floor, in pool and promontory of vapour over the northern heavens. He and she had been talking Italian in ridiculous fashion to their head gondolier, and now Claude pointed dramatically northward and said, "Curioso Claudo," on which all the gaiety and laziness of that child of the south vanished, and he and his Poppy put the boat about and rowed top speed for Venice. They had come in expectation of fine weather, with no felse, but before they were halfway home a squall of prodigious wind and blinding rain struck them, and for an hour she and Claude nestled close beneath one mackintosh, hearing the squeal of the wind, the buffet of the rain, and by degrees the gradual rising of waves. They made a bolt for it across the last open water between San Michele and Venice, narrowly escaping being swamped. Somehow to Dora now, that seemed the best of all the days. The gondola was 3 inches deep in savage spray-blown water. She knew there was danger of some sort abroad, when they had already started, and had gone too far in the maniac wind that descended on them to get back, but crouching beneath the one mackintosh with Claude, with the rain streaming in from 100 points, and with the danger of capsize imminent, she found a glory and triumph in the moment, which, indeed, was independent, or almost so, of Venice, and was pure Claude. He had lit a cigarette, after succeeding in striking a match with infinite trouble, saying, "Now for the last smoke this side the grave," and Dora found a sublimity of sang-froid in this remark. But at that time all he said or did was golden. He gilded all things for her. In those days she was incapable of criticism with regard to anything that concerned him, for to her, lover of beauty as she was, his beauty, which now was a possession of hers, was a thing of dazzling and blinding quality. It blinded her still, but it must be supposed that the enthrallment of it was quite absolute no longer, since now, at any rate, she knew it was that which had taken the very command and control of herself out of her hands. She was in love with him, that was perfectly true, but it was with his beauty, an inextricable part of him, that she was in love. And now, today, as she leaned out of her window over the summer stillness, she found that she was beginning to be able to look undazzled at him, to see the qualities and nature of her husband as they were themselves, not as they had appeared to her in the early months of her marriage, when she could not see him at all except through the enchanted haze which surrounded him. Before she married him she had been able to do as she did today, to know that at times something, trivial it always was, as when he spoke of some woman as a handsome lady, made her check suddenly. But when they were married, when he and his wonderful beauty were hers, and she was his, that power of criticism had altogether left her, and it was only with a sort of incredulous wonder that she could remember that she had ever been capable of it. Today, now that he was absent, for she had not seen him for over 24 hours, she for the first time consciously registered the fact that the power of judgment and criticism as regards him had come back to her. Dora drew herself in from her leaning out of the window, and settled herself in a chair. This discovery rather startled her. Insignificant as it might sound, if she had described it to May Franklin or some other friend, it seemed to herself to be indicative of some essential and radical change in her relation to her husband. And it concerned itself not with the present only and with the future, but reached back into the past, so that 100 little scenes and memories bore a different aspect to her now from that which they had hitherto borne. It had been enchanting to her, for instance, that he had said he would as soon be at Clapham Junction as at Venice, provided she was with him. At the time she had only thrilled with ecstatic wonder that she could be so much to him. Now she made the comment that he did not really care for Venice. That was a pity. It was a defect in him, that he was indifferent to the exquisite beauties with which he was surrounded. She had not seen that before. It made him, so to speak, have no part in her Venice, which, strangely enough, he had created for her. It was as if a father disowned, did not recognize his own child. Dora had no desire to pursue this train of thought, for there was something vaguely uncomfortable at the back of it at which she did not wish to look closer. So she mentally brushed it aside, and, a thing that was a daily if not an hourly habit of hers, took her mind back to the first days in which they had been together, and let it float her slowly down the enchanted weeks that had followed till it landed her at the present day again. Such retrospect had, indeed, passed out of the range of voluntary thought. It was like the pillow on which her mind, when at rest, instinctively reposed itself. After Venice they had wandered a week or two longer in North Italy, until toward the end of October a foretaste of winter caught them on the Italian lakes, and they had started for home, arriving there at the beginning of November. They had but passed through London, spending a couple of days at Claude's little flat in Mount Street, and had then gone down to Grota for the first big pheasant shoot of the year. She found both her mother and Austell there. Dora was essentially appreciative of all the delightful things in life which can only be obtained by abundant money, and hitherto very few of these had been within her reach. True, she was sensible enough to enjoy pictures that were not hers, to look at beautiful things exposed for the public in museums and art collections, but she did not belong to that slightly unreal class of enthusiasts who say that as long as they are able to see fine pictures and fine statues they get from them all the pleasure which such things are capable of giving. Nor again was she deficient in her appreciation of comfort, and she knew that it was infinitely nicer to telephone from the flat at Mount Street, as they had done on the 2 evenings they were there, and get a box at the theatre, than getting seats at the back of the dress circle, or, if times were exceptionally bad, having an egg with her tea and taking her humble place in the queue for the pit. She was humorist enough and of a sufficiently observant type to find entertainment of a kind while waiting in the queue, but it seemed to her insincere to say that you preferred going to a theatre in such mode. Similarly, though you had such a beautiful view and got so much air on the top of a motor bus that such a mode of progression along the London streets was quite enjoyable, it was really far more enjoyable to have your own motor, though your outlook was not from so elevated a perch and there was probably not quite so much air. And she was perfectly aware that she took the keenest pleasure in all the ease and comfort with which she had been surrounded since her engagement. Pierre Loti, as she had once quoted to May Franklin, had said that it was exquisite to be poor, but for herself she found it, having had long experience of poverty, much more exquisite to be rich. But there were things about that shooting week, in spite of her newly awakened love and her newly found opulence, which was in such resounding evidence there, which gave her bad moments. Moments when she was between bitterness and laughter, nearer perhaps to laughter than the other, but to laughter in which bitterness would have found the reflection, at any rate, of itself. A rather ponderous plan, evolved by the geniality and kindness of her father-in-law, underlay that week. He had been in London for the inside of one of the days that she and Claude had stopped in town after their return from Venice, en route for Grota, and had lunched with her. Claude had been out. Uncle Alf had sent for him rather peremptorily, so it seemed to Dora to come down to Richmond, and since Uncle Alf was purse-holder for them both, and had intimated that he wished to see him on matters connected with the purse, the invitation had the authority of a command. Consequently, she and Mr. Osborne lunched alone. "And you look rarely, my dear," her father-in-law had said, giving her a loud smacking kiss. "Claude seems to agree with you, bless his heart and yours, for there is nothing like being married, is there, when all's said and done, provided you find him as your heart points out to you? And you'll give old Dad a bit of lunch, and leave to smoke his cigar with you afterward, and tell him about Venice. My dear, I've looked forward to your return with that boy of mine, so as never was, and I'm blessed if I don't believe Mrs. O wouldn't be jealous of you if it wasn't that you were his wife. But she thinks naught's too good for Claude, even if it's you. She says I run on about you like a clock that won't stop striking, and I dare say she's in the right of it." It was not very easy to tell Mr. Osborne about Venice, because it was hard to think of any common ground on which he and Venice might conceivably meet and appreciate each other, but the description seemed to satisfy him, for it was largely Claude and I. And what satisfied him even more was the evident happiness of the girl. She was in love with life, with love and with Claude and with beautiful things. Claude he had given her, beautiful things he could give her, and he asked if it was possible to pick up a Tintoret or two. Then came the plan, unfolded to her with almost boisterous enjoyment. "Mrs. O and I have put our heads together," he said, "and I'm her ambassador, accredited, don't they say? By her, and with authority to put propositions before you. Well, it's just this. When that dear boy and you come down to Grota tomorrow, we want you to be master and mistress of the house, and Mrs. O and me and Per and all the rest of them to be your guests. It'll be for you to say what time we breakfast, and to see cook, and Claude will arrange the shoots, and give us a glass of wine after dinner if he thinks it won't hurt us, and it'll be found it won't, if he sticks to the cellar as I've laid down for myself and of which I'll give him the key. It'll give you a sort of lesson, like, my dear, as to how to make your guests comfortable, as I'll be bound you will." It required no gifts of perception whatever to be able to appreciate the kindness and affection of that speech, and Dora did them full justice. At the same time she could not help being conscious of many little jerks. She remembered also the party there had been at Grota shortly after her engagement, wondered if the same sort of gathering would be assembling again, and tried to think of herself as hostess to Mrs. Price, Lady Ewart, and Mrs. Per. They were really very terrible people, and on this occasion of her homecoming with Claude it was beyond all question that the badinage would be of the most superlative order. She remembered with fatal distinctness how her mother-in-law had alluded to Mrs. Per, before Dora met her, as very superior, and it seemed to her that no long and conscientious analysis of character could have arrived at a report so definitely and completely true as was the verdict conveyed by those two words. Yet she had married Claude, she loved Claude. To accept the burden of this honor was clearly one of the obligations entailed upon her, for it was Mr. Osborne's wish, his very kindly wish, backed and originated by his wife, and there was no shadow of excuse to shelter under for declining it. So her pause before replying was not greater than could be well filled by the smile with which she greeted the proposal. "Ah, but how dear of you," she said cordially, "but we shall make all kinds of mistakes. Are you sure you and Mrs. Osborne are willing to risk our making a hash of your party? I shall probably forget most things, and Claude will complete it by forgetting the remainder." Mr. Osborne laughed. "My dear, you fill my plate with that hash, and I'll ask for more," he said. "I'll send up my plate twice for that hash, hey? That's capital, and it will give Mrs. O a bit of a rest, for she's a little overdone. Indeed, I was thinking of putting off the party, but she wouldn't hear of it. And there's another thing, my dear. Couldn't you manage to call me Dad, as the boys do? It isn't in nature that you should call Claude's father Mr. Osborne. I know it's a favor to ask, like, but you and me hit it off from the first, didn't we? You was the right wife for Claude, and no mistake." That met with a far more spontaneous response from Dora. There was affection, kindness, as always, in what he said, but there was more than that now, namely, a pathos of a very touching kind, in his making a favor of so simple a request. Dora was ashamed of not having complied with it before it was asked. "Why, of course," she said. Dad, doesn't it come naturally? And if you talk such nonsense, Dad, about its being a favor, I shall call Claude Mr. Osborne Jr." He patted her hand gently. "Thank you, my dear, thank you," he said. "Mrs. Per calls me Mr. Osborne, as you've often heard, and I don't know that with her somehow that I want her to call me different. But I know with people like you, born in another rank of life, that's not the custom. You make pet names and what not that I ask that. But I should feel it as a favor, my dear, I should indeed, if you felt you could manage to say Dad like the boys do." Dora held up a reproachful forefinger. "Now, I warn you," "Dad," she said, "in one moment Claude shall be called what I said he should be." Then not a word more about it. "Well, give my love to that rascal who's got so much more than he deserves. Bless him, and we expect you both tomorrow." "Gone to see Uncle Alf, has he? Poor old Alf, a mass of lumbago he was when I saw him 2 days ago. And acid? I should scarce have thought that anyone could have felt so unkind. And a beautiful day it was, too, with the sun shining, and all nature, as you may say, rejoicing all but poor old Alf, God bless him. But Claude always does him more good than a quart of liniment, or embrocation either, though what he spends on doctor stuff is beyond all telling." Such was Mr. Osborne's plan, and, as has been said, the accomplishment of it gave Dora some rather bad moments. The party was terrifically ill-assorted. Lady Ewart, Mrs. Price, and 1 or 2 more like them and their husbands, being balanced against her mother and Ostel, the Hungarian ambassador and his wife, and several others of that particular world in which both Mr. and Mrs. Osborne so much wished to be at home. Dora, in consequence, was positively tossed and gored by unremitting dilemma. She was obliged to make herself what she would have called both cheap and vulgar in order to convey at all to the Prices and Ewarts that particular pitch of cordiality to which they were accustomed. Alderman Price, for instance, habitually declined a second helping, not because he did not want, and intend, to have it, but because good manners made him say no the first time and yes the second. As for asking for more, as Ostel did, he would not have considered that any kind of behavior. He was used to be pressed or tempted, and Dora had to press and tempt him, a thing which, though she would have been delighted if he had eaten a whole haunch of venison, she found difficult to do naturally. You had to call the footman back, Mrs. Osborne did it quite easily, and get him to put Mr. Price's plate aside, and wait till he had given the affair a second thought. Then he said, "Well, I don't know as if," and the matter was brought to a triumphant conclusion. Yet it was not easy to manage if the procedure was new to you. Or, again, his wife particularly liked a glass of port after dinner, which after all was a completely innocent desire, but her gentility was such that she would never have thought of accepting it when it was casually offered her, but every night it had to be accepted in order to oblige Dora. Mrs. Osborne, before giving up the reins of government to her daughter-in-law, had imparted this diplomatic instruction, and Dora had been subsequently assured that her pressing and tempting was held to be the perfection of hospitality. The flow of badinage, too, that went on incessantly from morning till night, and was almost exclusively matrimonial in character, was difficult to live up to, for whatever she or Claude did was construed by Mr. Osborne or Sir Thomas, with whom Dora, so she was assured by Lady Ewart, had become a favourite, into having some connubial bearing. If, as happened one day, Claude drove Mrs. Price home from the shooting, Lady Ewart, with an inflamed and delighted countenance, told Dora that she wouldn't wonder if they lost their way, and said the motor had broken down, to explain their coming in late. Or again Dora was pompously asked by Sir Thomas, on a morning of streaming wet, when no shooting was possible, to have a game of billiards, and accepting this proposal was expected to be immensely amused by the suggestion that Claude would be found hiding in the window seat, to hear what went on. The joke was all embracing. If she spoke to Claude, somebody wondered, audibly, what she was saying. If she spoke to anyone else, it was, again audibly, imagined that Claude was looking jealous. And if, for the moment, she did not speak to anybody, wonder was expressed as to what was on her mind. All this was trivial enough in itself, and, as she well knew, oceans and continents of kindliness lay behind it. Her guests, this section of them at any rate, were pleased and well entertained as far as her part was concerned, and were charmed with her. But during all those 7 stricken days, for the party was of the most hospitable order, and embraced a complete week, she had to nail a brave face, so to speak, over her own, and set her teeth inside the smiling mouth. The Prices and the Ewarts had come here to enjoy themselves, and clearly they did. But there was a certain thick-skinned robustness which was necessary to anyone who had to enter into the spirit of their enjoyment. Had the party consisted entirely of Ewarts and Prices and Puss, Dora would have found her own conduct an affair of infinitely less difficulty. As it was, her mother and Ostel were there, and some 6 or 7 more of her own world who looked on with faint smiles at such times as humour was particularly abundant, and, to do the barest justice to it, it must be said that it seemed unfailingly ubiquitous. One night Sir Thomas had taken Madame Kodjek, the wife of the Hungarian ambassador, into dinner, and in an unusual pause in the conversation Dora had heard her say in her faint silvery voice, "How very amusing, Sir Thomas. What fun you must have in Sheffield." Then she turned her back on him, put a barrier of a white elbow on the table between him and her, and talked to Dora herself, 3 places off, for the rest of dinner, a thing which, as Sir Thomas's indignant face silently testified, was conduct to which he was unaccustomed. Clearly such breach of ordinary manners was a thing unheard of in Sheffield. Dora, halfway between giggles and despair at the incident, had not, though longing to know, the heart to ask Mimi afterward what was the particular incident that made her conclude that life in Sheffield was so humorous an affair. But Sir Thomas had confided in his favourite that he thought the Baroness a very haughty lady and without any sense of what was due to the gentleman who took you in to dinner. It had been difficult, therefore, to steer a course, and, as in the case of those wandering channels in the lagoons, there were here no friendly groups of parley to guide her. She had to guess her way, turn her helm swiftly this way and that, to avoid running aground. Had she not been Dora Osborne, she would, if she had found herself in a house party of this description, have had entrancing bedroom talks to Mimi and others about Sir Thomas and the Ewarts, and the Osbornes. Such talks would not have been unkindly. She would have seen, even as she saw now, that all manner of excellent qualities underlay the irredeemable vulgarity, and, a thing more difficult in her present position, she would have seen the humorous side of affairs. But, as it was, she could not have any bedroom talks at all of this description. Indeed, Mimi and others pointedly avoided, as they were bound to do, any mention of these other guests from the amiable desire not to say things that would embarrass her. Dora had married an Osborne, and by that act had joined another circle. True, she had not in the least left her own, but she had taken on, by necessity, the relations and friends of her husband. Indeed, looking at the transaction as a whole, there was not one of her friends who did not think she had done right, and few who did not a little envy her. There were some slight inconveniences in marrying into such a family, but they weighed very light indeed if balanced against the consequent advantages, and it was the business of her friends to minimize these disadvantages for her, pretend that Sir Thomas made no particular impression on them, and be deaf to Dora's insidiousness in getting Mrs. Price to have her glass of port. And the advantages were so great, she had gained superabundant wealth in exchange for crippling poverty. The Osbornes' house was now one to which everybody of any sense, and many of no sense, went, if they were so fortunate as to be asked, and, above all, she had married that charming and quiet Adonis of a husband, who looked anyhow leagues away from and above his effusive parents. And Claude? During all this week Dora had been filled with an almost ecstatic admiration of him. He took the place corresponding to that which she herself so difficultly occupied, with perfect ease and success, and without apparent effort. To Mrs. Price's most outrageous sallies he found a reply that convulsed her with laughter, or made her, as the case might be, call him a naughty man, and the thing seemed to be no trouble to him. And for the time, anyhow, such replies gave her no jerks, or, if they did, they were jerks of relief. "I shall warn Sir Thomas, Lady Ewart," he would say, "and you will find yourself watched, and without pause or hint of discomfiture continue a bark conversation with Madame Kodjek." Dora had set herself with a heartfelt enthusiasm to study and find out the secret of this wonderful performance, and she came to the conclusion that it was consummate tact grafted onto a nature as kindly as his father's or mother's that produced this perfect flower of behavior. And the tact a rare phenomenon rather, for tact implies the tactician. The pleasant schemer was apparently unconscious. At least if it was conscious, it was Claude's delightful modesty that disclaimed the knowledge of it. One evening she had a word with him about it. "Darling, I don't know how you manage," she said. "And oh, Claude, I wish you would teach me. Everyone's delighted with you, and you do it all so easily. How can you flirt? Yes, darling, flirt with Mrs. Price one moment and without transition talk to Mimi on the other side. Oh, the Price woman isn't so bad," said he. "She's a kind old soul really, and if you chaff her a bit she asks no more." He had come in to see her before going down to the smoking room again, where the best cigars in England were, so to speak, on tap, and where Pa and Sir Thomas, between the cigars, a little brandy and soda, and the recollections of their prowess among the pheasants during the day, always sat up late. In Mr. Osborne's house it was one of the rules of honor that the host should express a wish to sit up later than any of his guests, or wait at any rate till they all had yawned before proposing retirement, and Claude, after this cheerful remark about Mrs. Price, turned to leave the room again. Dora knew what was expected of him and suddenly rebelled. "Surely you can leave them to drink and smoke and turn out the lights," she said. "Do stop and talk to me. I have sent Hendon away, and who is to brush my hair? Besides, I want to talk. I've got better right to talk to you than Sir Thomas has." "Oh, Claude, teach me. You are yourself all the time, and yet you can say things to Mrs. Price, which, if it wasn't you—" Dora broke off. He had unpinned the tiara, which was one of his father's many wedding gifts to her, and which she wore, knowing it was a ludicrous thing to do in the country, because it pleased him, and next moment her hair, unpinned also by a movement or two of his deft fingers, fell in cataracts round her face. "I don't see the trouble," he said. "Lady Ewart isn't your sort, darling, but it's you who are so clever. It's you who manage so well, not me. Why, she said only today that she was quite jealous of you, for Sir Thomas thought such a lot of you, though of course that was only her chaff. And they say he'll be in the running for a peerage at the next birthday honours." For the moment Dora was silent, simply she could not speak. She saw in the looking-glass in front of her, looking over his shoulder, that face which to her was the most beautiful thing in the world, and simultaneously she heard what that beautiful mouth said. For that instant her mind was divided. It could not choose between beauty and the hopelessness of what was said. As if anybody cared who was made a peer, or as if a peerage conferred not only nobility but a single ounce of breeding. As if a problematic Lord Ewart could be for that reason even a shade more tolerable than a Sir Thomas of the same name. What could it matter, except to guards and railway porters who might count on a rather larger tip? And then the greater potency of her lover's face absorbed her, and she lifted up her hands and drew it down to her. "Ah, well, what does it all matter?" she said, "so long as there's you and me. But go down, dear, if you think you had better, and be sure to yawn a great deal, so that they won't sit up very late." But after he had gone she wondered whether she guessed the reason why Claude made himself appropriate so easily to Lady Ewart and Mrs. Price. Was it simply because he found no difficulty in doing so? Was not his cleverness, his tact, shown rather in the fact that he could talk to Mimi appropriately? And it was at that moment, as she remembered now, that a certain trouble, vague and distant as yet, and couched in the innermost recesses and darkness of her mind, began to stir. She scarcely then knew what it was. She knew only that there was veiled trouble somewhere. After this week of the shooting party, she and Claude had returned to town, still occupying the flat in Mount Street, where they remained till Christmas, with weekends in the country. Most of these had been passed at the houses of Dora's friends, and it could not but please and gratify her to find how Claude was welcomed and liked, so that, if at Grota there had been trouble astir, it was still again. He did all the usual things better than the average. He shot well, he played golf excellently, he was a quiet and reliable partner at bridge, he talked pleasantly, always got up when a woman entered the room, and always opened the door for her to leave it. Such accomplishments did not, it is true, reach down very far below the surface, but a young man, if he happens to be quite exceptionally good-looking and has such things at his fingers' ends, will generally be a welcome guest. Dora had never actually wanted comforting with regard to him, but it pleased her to see that he took his place easily and naturally. For the rest, he was busy enough, for in view of the next general election he was nursing a suburban constituency, which promised well. He spoke with fluency and good sense, he was making an excellent impression in public, and he earned a considerable personal popularity in the domestic circles of his voters. And in this connection Dora had another uncomfortable moment. As was frankly admitted between them, she could help him a good deal here, and she often went down with him and made innumerable calls at West Brentworth on miles of detached and semi-detached villas. It was an advantage beyond doubt, in this sort of place, that Claude had married a girl of title, and Lady Dora Osborne, or, as she was more generally addressed, Lady Osborne, charmed a large section of constituents not only because she was delightful, but because her brother was the Earl and her mother the Countess. There was no use in denying or failing to make the most of this adventitious advantage, and Dora made the most of it by being completely natural, and entering with zest into the questions of board wages and the iniquities of tweenies. She could do that with knowledge and experience to back her, since such minutiae had formed a very real part of her life up to the time of her marriage, and her mother was an adept in getting the most out of those who were so fortunate as to be the recipients of the somewhat exiguous wages. She could speak about beer money and the use of coals when the household was on board wages with point and accuracy, and it charmed West Brentworth to find that Lady Osborne was not too high to take interest in such matters. At other houses, however, there reigned a more aristocratic tone. There would be a peerage and a copy of the World on the table, and a marked unconsciousness of the existence of anybody who was not a baronet. There the parties for Newmarket were discussed, and Mrs. Sandford, pouring out tea, and tempting Lady Osborne to a second cup, would say that the whole world seemed to have been in town lately, and was Lady Osborne dining at the Carlton 2 nights ago when so many distinguished people were there? Upon which would ensue a very enlightened conversation. Mrs. Sandford knew quite well that the Earl of Wendover was Dora's first cousin, and the Viscount Bramley her second cousin, for that came out of the peerage, and what a beautiful terrace there was at Bramley, for that came out of country life. Then, and this was the uncomfortable moment, she and Claude got into their motor, having made the last call, and started for town. Claude said, "What a superior woman Mrs. Sandford seems to be." All these things, and others of which these were typical, Dora thought over as she sat in the window of her sala looking over the Grand Canal on that baking afternoon in June when Claude had gone to Milan to meet his father and mother. They were all trivial enough, each at any rate was trivial, but today she wondered whether there was an addition some to be done with regard to them. Each, if she took them singly, might be disregarded, just as halfpennies have no official status on cheques and are not treated seriously. But did they add up to something that could not be disregarded? She did not know, and, very wisely, forbore to conjecture. Besides, the gross heat of the day was subsiding, and a little breeze had begun to stir. Below the window Giovanni had already finished the toilet of the gondola, and was putting in the tea basket, since she had said she would have tea out on the lagoon. Venice called to her, beckoned her away from thoughts where something sombre or agitating might lie concealed, into the sunlight and splendor of the day. Chapter 6. Mr. and Mrs. Osborne, as has been mentioned, had no idea of planting themselves on Dora and her husband in their visit to Venice, and since the visit was to be thoroughly Bohemian in character, and they hoped and expected to rough it, it had seemed to them equally unsuitable to go to an hotel, where no doubt medievalism would have been supplanted by modern conveniences. They both wanted, with that inexpressible elasticity and love of experience which was characteristic of them, to behave native fashion and do like the Venetians, as Mrs. Osborne put it, and indeed the phrase pleased her husband no less than herself. So they had taken the Palazzo Dandoli for a fortnight, at a prodigious weekly rent, which included, however, the wages of the servants and the use of the gondolas. With a view to roughing it thoroughly, Mrs. Osborne had only brought her maid with her, and her husband was completely unattended. It was to be a jaunt, a wedding trip, a renewal of old times. Probably there would be little to eat and drink, and heaven only knew what kind of a bed to sleep in, while an Italian manservant would probably not know how to fold trousers. But all these possible inconveniences were part of behaving native fashion, and were not only to be expected but welcomed as being part of the genuine article. The house stood on the eastern outskirts of Venice, with a garden facing San Michele and the lagoon, and here Dora strolled with her father-in-law on the morning after their arrival, waiting for the appearance of Mrs. Osborne, who, since they had arrived late the night before, was taking it easy, and was not expected down till lunchtime at 12:30. Dora knew the owner of the place and had been there before, but never in these early days of summer, while yet the gardens were unscorched and the magic of spring had woven its ultimate spell. All the past was redolent in the walls of mellowed brick, the niches empty for the most part, save where a bust or two of stained Carrara marble still lingered, in the grey of the ivy-hung fountain, in the grilles of curving ironwork that gave view across the lagoon to the cypresses of San Michele, and, farther away, the dim tower of Torcello. Long alleys of cut and squared hornbeam, with hop-like flowers, led like green church aisles down the garden, and spaces of grass between them were hedged in by more compact walls of yew and privet, with its pale spires of blossom faintly sweet. Round the fountain stood 3 serge-coated sentinels of cypress, encrusted over with their nut-like fruits, and, flame-like against their sombre foliage, were azaleas in bright green tubs, and the swooning whiteness of orange blossom. Elsewhere, the formality of the cut hornbeam alleys and clipped hedges gave place to a gayer and more sunny quarter, though even there Italy lingered in the pavement of red and white stone that led between the more English-looking flower beds. Peach trees, in foam of pink flower, and white waterfalls of spirea were background here. In front of them stood rows of stiff foxgloves, and in front again a riot of phlox and columbine and snapdragon covered the beds to the edge of the path. To the left lay the rose garden, approached by a walk of tall Madonna lilies, already growing fat-budded, and prepared to receive the torch of flower life from the roses, when their part in the race should be done, and homely pansies, with quaint, trustful faces, made a velvet-like diaper of deeper color. Here, too, stood another fountain that from leaden pipes shed freshness on the basin below, where clumps of Japanese iris were already beginning to unfold their great butterfly flowers, imperial in purple or virginal in white, and over the green marble edge of it quick lizards flicked and vanished. Dora had arrived at the palazzo while yet the morning was young and dewy, and, leaving word that she had come, passed through the white shady courtyard of the house and down the long alleys of the garden to look out on the lagoon from the far end of it. The tide was high and the cool water shimmered over the flats that an hour or two ago were still exposed and lay in expanse of glistening ooze, or green with fields of brilliant seaweeds. But the red-sailed fishing boats had to pass between the rows of parley that marked the channels, and a little company of them were even now going seaward. The wind blew gently from the north, tempering the heat, and to the north were visible the remote summits of snow-clad Alps. Just opposite were the orange walls and black cypresses of San Michele, but in the gaiety of the gay day even those associations were gladdened. It was good to be anything in Venice, even to be dead, and resting there in sound of the whispering lagoon. Then came the interruption she had waited for. Her name was jovially called, and down the pergola of vines which led to the grill, between the clumps of syringa and riot of rambler, came Mr. Osborne. He had left England with the intention of roughing it and enjoying the experience, and was clad in the way that had seemed to him appropriate. He wore a Norfolk jacket and knickerbockers, below which his short fat calves looked like turned oak posts clad in thick worsted and set in strong brown boots. On his head he wore a felt hat with a puggaree attached to it, and round his shoulders was a strap that carried a large binocular glass. In a word, he appeared like a man deer-stalking in the tropics. Like this he was equal to any foreigneering vicissitudes and provided against all accidents that might happen in a town where, instead of walking from one place to another, you went in a black sort of punt with a strange battle-axe at the prow. "Well, dearie, and here we are," he said, "and pleased we are to be here, I do assure you. Passed a comfortable night, too, and so I warrant you has Mrs. O, for she was asleep still when I came downstairs. But, my dear, they've got but a paltry notion of furnishing these rooms. We had supper last night when we got in a great room as big as the hall at Grota, and nothing there but a table and a few chairs and some painted canvas on the walls, and on the floor a rug or two as you could scarcely get both feet upon. However, we were hungry, and the food was good enough. Macaroni they gave us, and a bit of veal and some cheese and strawberries. And this seems a pretty bit of garden, where Mrs. O can sit and be cool if she finds the heat oppressive. And it's good to see you, my dear, and blooming you look." He gave her a loud, kind kiss, and continued to pour forth his first impressions of Venice. Claude met us at Milan, as he'll have told you, he said, and saw us safe here last night. It's strange, though, going to your house in a boat, and such a smell as there was at the last corner, but one before we got here I never encountered. I should have had it looked into in no time if such a thing had occurred in the works at Sheffield. But it seems fine and open here, and I've no doubt we shall be well enough off. But to think of those old doges with never a bathroom in their houses, nor hot water laid on nor nothing. But I enjoy that, my dear. I want to see the old life as they had it, and look at their palaces, and live in one, and see their pictures, and think what manner of folk they was, being born, and getting married and dying and all, in the very rooms we now occupy. Dora suddenly laughed. "Oh, Dad," she said, "you are too heavenly. But why have you put on those thick clothes? It's going to be a roasting day. I'm glad to see you. I'm sure you will find the house comfortable, and, oh, did you ever see such a morning? Look out there across the lagoon. It's Venice, you know, Venice." Mr. Osborne looked out through the iron grill. "Well, I'm sure it's pretty enough," he said, "and talk of sea air, why the sea's all round you. We must have come a matter of a mile over the viaduct last night after we left the mainland. And sea air is what I want for Mother. She wants a bit of setting up, and if she feels inclined to keep quiet and not look at the galleries and churches and sights every day, my dear, you'll know it's because she isn't quite up to the mark. Well, no, I'm not anxious about her, for she takes her food, and was as pleased to come out here, such as never was, but she's been a bit tired, and must take a rest." "She's not ill?" asked Dora. "There's nothing wrong?" "Not a bit of it. 'Tis true, I wanted her to see the doctor before she left home, but she wouldn't hear a word of it. Just to go to Venice, so she said, and see Claude and Dora, and not do much, that's the prescription for me, she said. And so here we are, my dear. Lunch at 12:30, too. How strange it seems. But after the breakfast they gave me, just a bit of toast and an egg, I don't doubt I shall be ready for it. But the coffee was prime, though it came up in an earthenware pot. I suppose it was that way the Doges took it. Law, to think of it all. Wedding the sea, too, every year. I read it in the guidebook on the journey. A curious custom that was heathenish, you may say. It takes one back, doesn't it? It was still an hour before lunchtime, and at Dora's suggestion they went out for a turn in her gondola which was waiting, since Mrs. Osborne was not to be expected down till lunchtime. Mr. Osborne, still feeling the insecurity of a foreign land, refused to change into more suitable clothes, and, already perspiring profusely, embarked with a sense of being prepared for anything. As they got in, Dora gave some short direction to her gondolier in Italian, and this roused his admiring curiosity. "It's a strange thing too," he said, "that you say something of which I can't understand a syllable, and round the boat goes, as if you'd said, right about turn. Such a bother as we had with luggage and what not, before Claude met us. But Mrs. O saw the hang of it, and kept saying, Venice, Palazzo Dandoli, whenever one of them brigands looked in on us, and it seemed they wanted no more than that. Brigands they looked, my dear, though I dare say they were honest men in the employment of their company. And what's that now, that big telegraph-looking thing?" He pointed at the huge disfiguring posts that brought the electric power into Venice. "Oh, electric light, I think," said Dora. "Or perhaps it's telephone." "My word, and I never expected to find either here," said Mr. Osborne. "Do you mean they have got the light and the phone? And why, if that's so, aren't they installed in the Dandoli?" "Oh, Dad," she said, "where do you want to telephone to?" "No, dearie, I don't want to telephone, but you'd have thought that in a place like that I've taken they'd surely have had the modern conveniences, if such were to be had. And where are we coming to now?" Dora did not answer at once. This was one of the best places of all in that city of best places. There was a sharp turn from a narrow canal, overhung by tall red-stained walls, and they shot out into the Grand Canal just above the Rialto. "Oh," she said, "look, look." The bow-shaped bridge lay to their left, as from the huddled houses they swept into the great waterway. A troubled reflection of palaces gleamed in the tide. The curve of the Grand Canal was flung outward and onward, reeling in the heat. Just opposite was the fish market, newly rebuilt, with columns of ornamented iron work. Mr. Osborne pointed an admiring forefinger at it. "Well, I never," he said, "to think to see the fellow of one of Puss' designs in Venice. I shall have the laugh of Purr over that, and tell him he copied them from some old courtyard of the Doges, or what not. Beautiful, I call them. After all, they were wonderful old folk, weren't they, when we think that they put up there a design that might have been made in Sheffield today. I assure you, dearie, they are just like Puss drawings for number 2 Light Arcade, same as is in the showroom at the works." Dora had not been attending very closely. Those who love Venice are apt to be inattentive when some new magic comes into view, and to Dora the bow arch of the bridge with the bow arch of the canal below grew in wonder the oftener that she saw it. "Arches?" she asked. "Arches like one of Puss' designs? Oh, do show me." "Why, that open place there," said Mr. Osborne, still immensely interested. "That arcade just opposite, with the ornamental arches in open work." Dora could not help laughing. "Oh, dear Dad," she said, "very likely they are Puss designs. That's the new fish market, just being rebuilt." And then it struck her that her laugh might sound unkindly. "It is quite possible they are Puss designs," she said. "Would it not be thrilling if they were? Giovanni," again she spoke in Italian, "just land at the market and ask some of the workmen where the iron arches came from. I see one not yet put up, wrapped in straw. There is some label on it. See if it is from Osborne, Sheffield." Giovanni floated the gondola to the side of the landing place with the flick of a quick-turned oar, and got out. In a moment he came back, having read the stamped label on the packing, and reported the gratifying news. "Oh, it's too thrilling," cried Dora, "to think that they came from your works. Dad, you're a perfect wizard to see that, and guess it was Puss. You must write to him and tell him that his ironwork is going up in Venice, and that you recognized it the first moment you saw the Grand Canal." Mr. Osborne gave a little inward tremolo of laughter. "Oh, I'm not so blind yet," he said, "and it's seldom you see work like Puss. There's something, as you may say, so individual about it. God bless the boy, how he'll like to hear that I spotted his design right across the Grand Canal. He might have been here, my dear, and studied the style of the architecture, when one sees how it fits in with the other monuments. I'll write to tell him that." Mr. Osborne remembered that Dora had told him that Venice was the most beautiful place in the world, and the Grand Canal the most beautiful thing in Venice, and he made a concession that he did not really feel. "Not but what he hadn't got a lot to compete against," he said. "That bridge now? That's a fine thing. And the curve of it looks built for strength. I warrant there's no iron girder made that would cause it to be safer. And the houses, beautiful, I'm sure. But I don't see any that I'd sooner take than the Palazzo Dandoli." Suddenly Dora felt something dry up inside her. That, at any rate, was how she mentally phrased the sensation to herself. Her father-in-law was kind and wise and good. He was anxious to please, he was anxious to be pleased. But at the concession for so she felt it to be that Purr had had a lot to compete with, when the excruciating iron arcade of the fish market was erected within stone throw of the Rialto and within pea-shooting distance of the wondrous canal, she felt for the moment the impossibility of herself and Mr. Osborne being together at Venice. The situation was one that she had not faced without a tremor. Now, for the moment, when it was actual and accomplished, it was inconceivable. But this mercantile discovery had delighted Mr. Osborne. It had clearly raised his previous estimate of Venice. A town that could so aptly enshrine this design of Puss was a town that must receive the best attention. There was probably more in it than he had been at first disposed to imagine. He gave it his best attention. A grey fussing steamboat going seaward on the tide and raising a huge wash of churned water, next engaged his admiration. Well, and if I didn't think when we took so long to get to the palazzo last night that the Italians would be wiser to build a big sea wall somewhere, and raise the level of the canal so as you could drive a horse and carriage down them, he said. But if you've got a ferry steamer that goes the pace of that law, my dear, how it makes us rock, I don't see what there's to complain of. And calling first on this side and then on that, same as they used to do on the Thames, what could you ask for more convenient? Again Dora had to enlist her sympathy on a foreign side. I know, she said, and they go right out to the Lido, where we'll go and bathe this very afternoon, Dad. It will be awfully hot after lunch, so we'll join the steamer at San Marco, and send the gondola out to meet us on the Lido, and take us back when it gets cooler. One gets roasted in a gondola on the lagoon when it's as hot as this. Mr. Osborne was clearly a little troubled at this suggestion. Ah, no doubt there are sets of bathing machines, he said at length. A dip in the briny, very pleasant. Dora did not at once grasp the cause of his embarrassment. We'll swim right out together, she said. You can swim forever in this sea. It's so buoyant. And then we sit on the sand and eat strawberries, while the sun dries us again. Then she saw that some portentous doubt on the question of propriety was in Mr. Osborne's mind, guessed it, and hastened to remove the cause of it. Or perhaps, coming straight out from England, you don't want to bathe, she said. Besides, there's the mater, she had adopted this from Claude. So we won't bathe. We'll take her out for a gyro, a row in the gondola, and have tea out on the lagoon. Dad, you'll love the lagoon, all grey and green. And the electric light poles cross it to the Lido. That will be nice, said Mr. Osborne quickly and appreciatively. And here's another bridge. Why, beautiful, isn't it? I think I like it better than that curved one. There seems more sense in it. You don't have to mount so high. They had passed round the last corner of the canal, and in front of them lay the straight lower reach of it that passes into the great basin opposite St. Mark's and the Doge's Palace. To right and left the stately houses stood up from the waterside, in glimmer of rose and blue and orange beneath the smiting glory of the noonday. Since yesterday the north wind, blowing lightly from the Alps, had banished the oppression of yesterday's heat, and the glitter of the city had awoke again, pearly in the shadow and jewelled in the sun. And in the immediate foreground the only blot of disfigurement was the object of Mr. Osborne's admiration, the flat, execrable iron bridge opposite the Academia. There it lay, convenient and hideous and impossible. And he liked it better than the curved one. It had more sense in it. But there was no need for Dora to rack her brains to find some response which should steer a middle way between lack of cordiality to her father-in-law on the one hand and artistic perjury on the other. Between the fish market, the iron bridge, and the vile convenient speed of the steamboat's Venice was going up in his estimation by leaps and bounds, and he was delighted to find he was almost able to endorse Dora's opinion on the town. Well, I call it all beautiful, my dear, he said. And it's as I said to Mother. Mother, I said, if Dora says Venice is a nice place, you may be sure there is something in it, and we were right to come out and have a look at it ourselves. But who'd have thought there was so much of modern convenience and comfort? And these gondolas too. I'm sure I'm as comfortable sitting here as in my own brougham, and, except when the steamers go by, they glide as smooth as on an asphalt road. Pretty the water is too, though not clear. I should have thought that here in the south there'd have been more of blue in it. But I'm a bit surprised, my dear, that you with your eye for colour shouldn't have done up the gondola more brightly, had some blue curtains, maybe, or picked out that handsome carved work on the prow with a touch of red. There's a thought too much black about it for my taste. Seems to tell of a funeral, almost. Dora could not argue about this. She could not give Mr. Osborne eyes which should see the value of the black blots of boats against the brightness of the sky mirrored in the canal. But it was easy to find praise in his speech to which she could respond, though the praise was expressed in a way that somehow set her teeth on edge. "Oh, they are the most comfortable things in the world," she said, "and I even like the indignant slap they give when the wash of the steamer crosses them. Beautiful thing, with its arching neck like some great black swan. Ah, there's 12 striking. We shall just have time to look into our house and fetch Claude and then get back to the Dandelion for lunch. I hope they'll have put it in the garden. Oh, Dad, how this place has got into my heart. You never did such a nice thing as when you gave Claude and me a month here." Mr. Osborne did not think much of Dora's water entrance to the great grey palace of which she had the first floor, but the size of the huge sala, which she remembered to tell him was 110 feet long, was most satisfactory to him. But with its polished stone plaster floor, and the Venetian emptiness of it, it seemed to him rather bare and comfortless. "Well, I'm sure it's a handsome room enough in point of size," he said, "and in this hot weather it looks cool and restful. But it seems strange to have never a strip of carpet on the floor, and scarce a picture on the walls. Lord, my dear, don't it make your teeth chatter to think of coming down to this of a winter's morning, when even now it strikes so cool? But isn't there some Tintoret now, my dear, that you could fancy, or if not that, half a dozen big photographs of the canal and the bridge you like so much to hang on the walls? And as for the floor, to be sure, it's a big job to cover it, but a proper carpet for that end of it where you've got your chairs and table, looking out over the canal, you shall have, if I have to telegraph to town for one, instead of those few rugs, or mats I should call them. Fancy advertising this as a house to be let furnished. I call it misrepresentation." Dora took his arm. "Oh, Dad, you are the kindest man that ever was," she said. "But indeed I want neither pictures nor a carpet, though it is darling of you to offer me them. I like it empty, it's the right style with these rooms. You found your dining room rather emptier than you liked, you know, but in a day or two you will get more than used to it, you will see how suitable it is. And I love this great empty room. Now we'll just go into the other rooms, and then we must get back for lunch. Claude seems to be out, I expect we shall find him at the Dandelion." Lunch, as they found when they got back, had been laid, as Dora hoped, in the garden, in the centre of a gravelled space sheltered from the sun by the mellow brick wall and a clump of overarching delicate-fingered acacia trees, and made cool to the ear by the plash of the fountain into its marble basin. Down the sides and at the corners of this space were tubs of orange trees, and the heaviness of their drowsy fragrance mingling with the large dilution of this tide of warm sea-scented air was translated into something exquisitely light and vigorous. Claude had already arrived and was waiting with his mother for them, who was in excellent spirits. "Why, dearest Dora," she said, "here we are, and ready I'm sure for lunch, to speak for myself, though it's not gone 12:30 yet, and in England we shouldn't be sitting down for another hour. And Claude's been telling me that in England now it's not gone 11:30, and here we are wanting our lunch at such an hour as that. Eh, what's that? What did he say to me? Pronto, it sounded like." Giuseppe, the smiling Italian butler, had approached Mr. Osborne, and said exactly that. "Yes, pronto," said Dora. "It means ready." Mrs. Osborne beamed back at Giuseppe. "And I'm pronto, too," she said. "Let's sit down. Mrs. O will be having the whole Italian language by heart before the week's out," said her husband. "And such a morning as I've had with Dora, mother. Bridges and canals and steamers and churches. Ah, and you'd never guess, so I'll tell you without teasing you. They are rebuilding the fish market with arcades of iron pillars, very handsome. And who do you think supplies them? Osborne, Sheffield, and no other, my dear, and it's +2, light arcade, same as is in the showroom, or I'm the more mistaken." Mrs. Osborne was as delighted as her husband. "I'll get a photograph of that this very afternoon," she said, "if there's such a thing as a photograph shop in Venice. Dora, my dear, have they a photograph shop in Venice, or hasn't that got here yet?" Dora threw back her head, laughing. "Oh, Mother, how divine of you," she said. "Considering I sent you literally hundreds of picture postcards when Claude and I were here in the autumn." "To be sure you did, my dear," said Mrs. Osborne cordially. "And it had gone clean out of my poor head. So a photograph of the fish market I'll send to Per this very afternoon, if I have to turn over all their scrapbooks for it. Mr. O, you'll never manage macaroni that way. Wrap it round your fork, my dear, as you see Claude doing, and in it goes without any bother." "Well, Mother, you're not so much of a hand at it yourself," observed Mr. Osborne in self-defense. "If I'm to take pattern by Claude, you take pattern by Dora. Now, I call that an excellent dish. You couldn't have it better done, not in your own house. What does he say to me, Dora, my dear? Bank, is it?" "Bianco," said Dora. "White. Will you have white wine or red?" "That's another word for Mrs. O," said her husband. "I told you she'd get it all off by heart in no time. Yes, I'll have a go at the Bianco. One wants something light and cool on a morning like this, especially if the true time is only 11:30. "I declare it makes me feel quite greedy," said Mrs. Osborne, "but such an appetite as I have today I haven't had since the middle of April. And what else have you seen this morning, Mr. Osborne? Give an account of the sights, my dear, or I shall think you've had no eye except for Dora." They waited in the cool greenness of the garden till the heat of the day began to abate, and then went all together in one gondola, at Mrs. Osborne's particular wish, to begin the sights of Venice. It was in vain that Dora suggested that everybody would be much more comfortable if they took two gondolas, and arranged their rendezvous, for Mrs. Osborne's heart was set on a family party and she wasn't sure that she would trust Mr. O with Dora alone any more that day. So, as badinage loomed on the horizon, Dora hastily and completely withdrew her opposition, and they all four squeezed into one gondola. The plan was to row out over the lagoon, and have tea at Santa Rosa. Tea made the centre of the afternoon, round which the rest appeared to be grouped in the minds of the Osbornes. Then they were to return to Venice in time to look in at St. Mark's, and loiter in the piazza, where Mrs. Osborne, it was hoped, would find at one of the photograph shops the representation of the fish market on which she had set her heart. Accordingly, the labouring gondoliers propelled the laden craft across to the little island, tied up to the bank, and procured strawberries from the fruit farm to add to their tea. Mrs. Osborne at first had a sort of vague prejudice against them, for abroad it was impossible to tell who hadn't been touching them, and, it is to be feared, it was only because the rest of the party found them remarkably good that she joined them. But she was charmed with their picnic, and saw a great similarity between the little waterway of the island and the Regent's Park Canal. They dined that evening at Dora's house. Meals somehow had leaped into sudden importance and preponderance since the arrival of her father-in-law in Venice, though they had no more meals than usual, and Mrs. Osborne as well as her husband was voluble over all they had seen. "Just to think that all the floor of St. Mark's is in marble," said she. "Why, it seems almost a shame, doesn't it? I'm sure there's not a cathedral in England that's got such a grand floor, and St. Mark's, so you said, didn't you, Dora, was only Roman Catholic?" Well, Mother," said Mr. Osborne, "it's the church of the country, you see, just as the English church is ours. You'd think more of the Roman, if you'd been brought up to it. But I'm surprised at their letting the floor get into that state. It was all ups and downs, and I'm sure I scarcely knew where I should be setting my foot next. So dark it was, too, that one couldn't see as much as one would like. If I were them, I should send for some good English architect as knows when a building's safe, and when it isn't, and make him cut half a dozen sensible windows somewhere, or perhaps take down one of them domes, and put in a glass roof to it instead. 5 domes there are, for I counted them, and that's beyond all reason." Dora felt that this was too much for her, simply she could not think of any reply whatever. If somebody proposed putting a glass dome in St. Mark's, what answer was possible? But there was no need for one. Mrs. Osborne instantly joined in again. And never did I think to see such shops in Venice, she said. Why, there was electric fittings at one I passed. Beautiful they were, with nymphs and such like holding up the globes, the same as you might get in the most superior shops in town. And I need never have brought out stationery with me, for there was a stationer's there as I could have bought the best cream laid at. And not expensive either, if you recollect that a lira is but 10p, though it's strange to have your silver coins worth 10p instead of a shilling. It wants a deal of thinking back into pounds and shillings. They seem to have a notion of building, too, said Mr. Osborne. I'm sure that great square tower they were building was as solid a piece of work as you could find anywhere. And to think that the original had stood there 500 years. How it takes you back. Claude nodded at Dora. What did I tell you? He said. Didn't I say the mater and pater would like Venice near as much as you do? Yes, dear, you were quite right, said Dora, with a sort of despairing acquiescence in even this. And what should you like to do tomorrow, Dad? She asked. There's more yet to see, is there? He said. And to think that I've been sightseeing all day, and not finished even now. Who would have thought there was so much in such a small town? Well, my dear, I'm in your hands, and whatever you show me I'll be bound I shall like it, if it comes up to the sample of Venice we've had today. And what says Mrs. O? Well, there's all the pictures we haven't seen yet, said she. Perhaps Dora would take us to see the pictures in the morning, but as for the afternoon I want nothing better than to have another look at St. Mark's and do a bit more shopping, and perhaps have a bit of a row afterward, for I declare it's a pity not to be out up till it's time to dress. The next 3 or 4 days were, it must be confessed, a sort of nightmare to Dora, for she took Venice too seriously to see anything humorous in what she had to go through. She took them to the Academia, and the Paul Veronese of the Marriage of Cana had an instant and amazing success owing to its size. Mr. Osborne doubted if it would have got into the picture gallery at Grota at all, and Mrs. Osborne had no doubt whatever about it. She saw at a glance that it would not, without you took its frame off. Other pictures pleased for other reasons. The Procession of the Cross, because St. Mark's and the Campanile came into it. The Tintoret of the Adoration of the Doges, because St. George was sitting by the Virgin, and he was an English saint. But before Titian's Assumption of the Virgin, a picture which, unfortunately, Dora detested, criticism with regard to its dimensions and even appreciation was mute, and its size and frame passed without remark. Mrs. Osborne's eyes filled with dear, heartfelt tears, and Mr. Osborne said, "Law, Maria, it was worth coming to Venice for to see this alone, my dear." Well, now, they could paint in those days. And immediately thereon, he bought an enormous copy of it, vilely executed, which an elderly English lady was just finishing with an uncertain stripling touch. She explained in quavering tones that she was obliged to charge very high for her copies because she spent weeks in study before she began to paint, in getting at the spirit of the original. And Mr. Osborne's alacrity in securing her work no doubt made her wish that she had charged higher yet for the spiritual tension required for its production. On another day they went to San Rocco, for Mr. Osborne found to his amazement that it was impossible to see all the pictures in Venice in one go, even if you spent the whole morning at it. This seemed strange, since you could see the whole of the Royal Academy in a less time. But the remedy was simple. Why not build a new picture gallery, hang all the pictures in Venice there, charge 2 lire, and have them all catalogued in one book? That was the kind of suggestion that cornered Dora. It seemed scarcely worth while to say that many were in the churches, and that it would be a pity to move them since they were painted for the places which they occupied. But, trying to be patient and kind, she did say so, and Mr. Osborne was fired with the brilliant thought of having copies made for the churches. Claude thought this an excellent idea. The governess hit the nail on the head this time, he said, and was surprised when Dora, turning aside, said, "Oh, Claude," to him. But apart from the pictures at San Rocco, which did not have a great success, the visit was memorable because Mrs. Osborne said "Buon giorno" to the custodian, just as if she did it every day of her life. He understood perfectly, and made a suitable reply about the loveliness of the day. That was a little beyond Mrs. Osborne, so she said grazy, and her husband admiringly commented, "Law, you speak it like a native. I told you the mother would have it by heart in no time," he said. On this morning they had still an hour to spare before lunch, since the Tintorets were not interesting or beautiful, and they rode across to the Giudecca to see a garden. The garden was fairly appreciated, though to Mrs. Osborne's mind the borders, where the southern June was rioting, were not quite so trim as she would have had them. But the great sugar factory was found to be most attractive, and Mr. Osborne was much surprised to find that Dora did not know whether it was possible to see over it or not. However, Claude made inquiries, and found it could be shown. He took his father there next day, and they were late for lunch. But Mrs. Osborne and Dora were late too. They had been ordering a very handsome gilt frame for the copy of the Assumption, and the pattern on it wanted a lot of choosing. Dora and Claude dined that night at the Dandeli, and Mr. Osborne announced that he and the mother had settled to stay on another week, for they were both thoroughly delighted with Venice. "And it's grateful to you, my dear, that we both are," said Mr. Osborne, "for telling us about it, and making us feel as how we should like to see it. There's 50 different things in Venice I should like to see a score of times, and if we're spared, my dear, we'll spend another month next year as per this sample." Now Dora did her best when this little speech was made, but Sirocco had been blowing all day, and, as usual, it had made her feel rather jerky and irritable. Also, it must be remembered, Mr. Osborne, with the best and most appreciative intention in the world, had, as may be conjectured from the foregoing details of their days, succeeded in spoiling everything for her. Who could look at and enjoy a picture while he was wondering why Tintoret hadn't given St. John something more on, or feel the magic of the approach across the lagoon when Mrs. Osborne said that the grey shining mudflats called to mind the foul below Truro at low tide, and Mr. Osborne confirmed the accuracy of this impression. But Maria had such an eye for likenesses. In consequence, Dora had a little failed in cordiality of tone on the receipt of the news, for by this plan they would leave Venice altogether, and every day till their departure would be taken up with these nightmare excursions, for it was part of the plan that they should do everything together. Her words, whatever they were, had been expressive of delight at their remaining, but Claude, at any rate, had noticed the failure in tone, and on their way back after dinner he spoke about it in kindly fashion, but so, it seemed to Dora, with a matchless awkwardness. "Sorry you're a bit off color, dear," he said. "I know Sirocco always makes you feel like that." Dora saw the obviously tactful intention. Her conscience also a little accused her, and she knew quite well what he had in his mind and was probably going to say. "Feel like what?" she said, though she knew this to be useless fencing. "Oh, feel like what you felt when you said you were so glad the pater and mater were going to stop here. I don't say that they noticed, but I did. I expect I'm quicker than them at feeling what you feel. What you said was right enough, it was just the way you said it." He leaned forward in his seat a little, looking her full in the face. And somehow the sight of him and the proximity failed for once to make themselves felt. His presence did not mitigate what he said, or stamp it with the old magic. "I wish you would explain," she said. "As if there was any need, darling," he said. "As if you don't understand as well as I do. You said you were delighted they were stopping, but only your voice said it. What's wrong? There's something up. And I thought we were having such jolly days together. Father and mother are enjoying it ever so much, and if they pretend they find it just a shade more delightful than they really do, why, it's just to please you, and make you feel it's a success that they do it. They settled to stop on, I believe, just for that." This made matters no better. Dora felt she ought to be delighted they were doing so, and ought to be touched and pleased with the reason Claude had conjectured. But she was not. Venice, as a matter of fact, or rather these days of Venice, were being spoiled for her. She would as soon, as Claude had once said to her, though with inverted meaning, have spent them at Clapham Junction if the Osbornes were to be with her. It was a great pity that they should stop on. if their motive in doing so was to gratify her. She hoped it was not that. "Oh, I don't think that is it, Claude," she said. "Dad likes the sun and lots of things, Stucky's sugar factory for instance, and your mother likes the pigeons and the shops. But it isn't Venice they like." "That's just what I say," said he. "They stop to make you think they do. They think the world of you, you know." "Yes, the darlings," said Dora quickly. That makes it so pathetic." "Pathetic? You mean that you don't think so highly of them?" Dora's heart suddenly sank. She had not meant that. She had meant only that it was a pity they stayed in Venice to please her, when in reality she was not enjoying their stay. She knew well that they were out of place in Venice. It was hopeless to try to explain. But even if she had meant the other, it would have been a fatal error on Claude's part to put it into words. He called this kind of frankness getting at the bottom of the thing. She felt he was certain to use that phrase now. He did so. "Let's get at the bottom of it, dear," he said, "and as we always do, I shall speak my mind, just like you. Perhaps it will sound harsh to you. I'm sorry if it does." He leaned back again, but without looking at him she could see that he tilted his head back, and put his chin a little out, the identical gesture which before she had found so attractive, so fascinating, even. She had told him so, too, 100 times. Had said she loved a man to know his mind, to be firm and decided, especially with those he loved best. No doubt he remembered that at this moment, perhaps even he was doing it consciously or at least half-consciously, so as to present what he had to say in the most attractive guise. But, suddenly and disconcertingly, she found the gesture scarcely less than odious. "I think the pater's been awfully good to you, dear," he said. "He's done a lot for you, given you all sorts of things you had no reason to expect. There's this month in Venice, to go no further than that. Well, it will stand him in a pot of money, and it's just because he doesn't grudge you one penny of it that I think you ought to feel rather more cordial to him about their stopping. I don't say that you behaved not cordially, because I think what you said was all right, and neither of them noticed that anything was awry, but you hadn't got the right feelings to back up your tongue. Wait a moment. I've not finished. There's something more yet, but I want to find words that won't hurt you, and yet will express what I mean." There was something in this that roused a certain sense in Dora that she knew had been often present in her mind, but which she hoped would always remain dormant. But now it began to awake. His words, kind as they were, implied an impossible attitude. He was judging, so it seemed to her, making himself jury and judge all rolled into one, and it was understood that she, put in the dock before him, would make no defense. He knew that he was right, that was what it came to, and was going to tell her, as kindly as possible, what was right. And on the instant she found herself refusing to be judged and condemned by his standards. He did not know what Venice meant to her, or how essentially his father's attitude toward the things and the place that she loved jarred on her. And unfortunately the affair was typical of hundreds of other affairs. That Mr. Osborne had no artistic sense of any sort or kind did not matter, but what was beginning to matter was that Claude, who apparently could not see that the entire absence of it in a person with whom she was brought into day-long contact made something rather hard to bear, had put on his wig and was going to sum up on a matter about which he knew nothing. Her behavior had never broken down, he had said that himself, and she believed it to be true. The matter was that he could not understand that she had to struggle against the disappointment of spoiled days, and was yet serenely confident that he had the complete data. "Don't mind about hurting me," she said quickly. "I want you to say exactly what you feel." They had arrived at the water gate of their home, without her noticing it, and Giovanni was already standing, hat in hand, to give her the support of his arm onto the steps, which were slippery with the receding tide. Claude was conscious of this first. He was quite conscious, also, of Dora's tone. "Not before the servants," he said. "Get out, dear, and take Giovanni's arm. The steps are like ice." Again Dora was in revolt. It seemed to her that he was advising her against a thing he might have done himself, but which she could not have dreamed of. She had been absorbed in this dispute, was it? Had not noticed. He had noticed, and warned her against an impossible thing. Giovanni unlocked the door for them, received orders for the next day, and they went up the stairs together in silence. And as they went up, all the womanhood in Dora, and there was much of it, and it was all sweet and good, rose, flooding for the time the bitter grey mud flats that had appeared. And at the top of the stairs she turned to him. "Oh, Claude," she said, "we're not quarrelling, are we?" "Takes two to make a quarrel," he said, "and I'm not one. But I want to say something yet, and I think you'd better hear it. I ask you to, in fact." She unpinned her hat, and led the way to the end of the big sala that overlooked the canal. She sat down in her accustomed chair, flinging the window open, for the night was very hot. "Say it then," she said. Again Claude's head went back. He felt perfectly certain he was right. "Well, it's just this. You've told me not to choose my words, so I won't bother to do so. You haven't felt right toward the pater and mater all this time here. When he wanted to go and see a factory, you wondered at him and, yes, you despised him a bit for it. When he admired some picture you didn't think much of, you wondered again. Now, he never wondered at you. If you wanted to sit half an hour before some adoring doge, he never wondered, any more than I wonder, for there are lots of people in the world, and they've got their different tastes and every right to them. But he only said to himself, 'Gosh, there's something there, and she's right, only I don't know what it is she's looking at.' He never thought you wanting in perception because you didn't admire the iron in the fish market. He only thought to himself, 'Let's go and see something this afternoon that Dora does like.' How often has he gone to the National Gallery in London? Never, you bet. He doesn't know a picture from a statue. And how often has he gone to look at some mouldy old Titian here, because you thought it worth a look? Well, isn't that anything? It's no use you and me not saying things straight out, and so I say it straight out. He's been boring himself fit to burst over your Botticellis, and been trying to admire them, saying this was the biggest picture he'd ever seen, and this was the smallest. And yet dear old Dad wasn't boring himself, because he was with you, and trying to take an interest in what you showed him. Well then, I ask you." There, close in front of her, was the beautiful face, the beautiful mouth which she loved, saying things which, as far as they went, her essential nature entirely approved. But at the moment his beauty did not move her. And the account he had given was correct. She had been having on her nerves the fact that Mr. Osborne took more pleasure in the steamboats than in San Rocco, in the fish market than in the Frati. He might be right, she might be right, but in any case the attitudes were incompatible. And Claude at the moment clearly took up the attitude that was incompatible with hers. There was much more, too, he did not see. He did not see that indifference on Dora's part did not destroy his father's pleasure in the speed of the steamboats, whereas his artistic criticisms blackened her pictures for her. And then, womanlike again, she knew only that Claude was her man, that he was beautiful, that he loved her. "I dare say I am quite wrong," she said. "I dare say you are quite right. Shall we leave it, then, darling? I will try to do better. I am sorry." "And there speaks my darling girl," said Claude. Chapter 7. The stay in Venice had naturally curtailed for Mrs. Osborne the weeks of her London season, but she had never intended to begin entertaining on the scale required by the prodigious success of the fancy dress ball last year till after Whitsuntide. Before leaving town in May she had sent out all invitations for the larger functions, except those which her invited guests subsequently asked for on behalf of their friends, and which she always granted, and it was clear that the world in general was going to pass a good deal of its time at number 92. Indeed, when she went through her engagement book on her return from Venice to Grota, hospitable though she was, and greatly enjoying the exercise of that admirable virtue, she was rather appalled at the magnitude of what she had undertaken. She was going to give 3 balls, real balls, 3 concerts, 2 big dinner parties every week, and a series of weekends down at Grota, while on such other nights as she was not dining out herself there were a series of little parties. In addition, Sheffield friends coming to stay with them for the insides of weeks to finish up with one of the Grota weekends. These visits she looked forward to with peculiarly pleasant anticipations, for the dear soul could not but feel an intense and secret gratification at the thought of such local celebrities as Sir Thomas and the Prices seeing her and Mr. O absolutely at the top of the tree, and entertaining princes and duchesses and what not, just as they had entertained aldermen and manufacturers at Sheffield. Also there was a secret that Mr. Osborne had told her, which filled her with feelings that were almost too solemn to be glee. The secret was not to be talked about yet, but in private he no longer called her Mrs. O but my lady. She hoped Sir Thomas would be with them when the honours were published, for secretly she still took her bearings, so to speak, by the stars as they appeared in Sheffield. There Sir Thomas Ewart, Bart. and Lady had been the very pole star to which quite important constellations reverently pointed. But now, as by some new and wonderful telescope, she saw herself and Mr. O high above Sir Thomas. Why, even Per would be the Honourable Per, and Sir Thomas would have to say, "After you, Per, my boy." She and Mr. O had already had more than one broken night in thinking of a title which he could submit for approval. Mrs. Osborne was all for something old and territorial. "There's Hurstmonceux, my dear," she said. "That ruined old castle which we drove over to see when you was down at Hastings with your attack of gout. I don't doubt you could buy it for a song, and there you'll be. And then next you'd be wanting me to do up the castle and live in it," said he. "Besides, it's a regular stumper to say, and French at that. No, my dear, we must think of something more British than that. There's plenty of good names without crossing the channel, so to speak, for something to call yourself by. But it's puzzling work, and new to me, to have to think of christening yourself afresh." "Law, Mr. Osborne, you don't mean to say that you've got to change your Christian name, too?" "No, no, my dear. There's no Christian name to bother about. I don't deal any more in Christian names, not officially, anyhow." He blew out the light. "Good night, my dear," he said. "And God bless you." It was all very well to say good night, but Mrs. Osborne could no more sleep than she could think of a name. After an interval she heard Mr. Osborne turn himself ponderously round in his bed, and knew that he was awake too. "There's some things called hundreds," she said. "I seem to remember that all England is cut up into hundreds, which is a queer thing to think upon. It'll be worth while seeing in what hundred the East End of Sheffield lies." "There's something in that," said Mr. Osborne, "and it would bring the business into it. Law, Mrs. Osborne, my lady, I'm glad I had nothing to say to a knighthood 5 years ago. I'd have been put on the shelf for good if I'd jumped at it. But not I. It's this parliamentary business coming on top of all I did at Sheffield that has given the extra turn. And I've been liberal, I'm sure, to the party. What was the name of the street now where I built the church in Sheffield? I declare it's gone out of my head. Thinking of new names drives the old ones out." "Commercial Road, my dear," said Mrs. Osborne, "for I thought of the name myself when you was building the street." "Then we ain't no further on yet. Grota, too, that's not to be thought of, as it's Lord Austell's second title." "After all, we only take the place on hire," said Mrs. Osborne, "and it doesn't bring the business in." "That's what beats me," said Mr. Osborne. "How to bring the business in. Lord Hardware, Tinware, that would be a thing to laugh at." The matter was still in debate on that morning when Mrs. Osborne went through her engagement book down at Grota and found so heavy a programme in front of her. And somehow today she did not feel markedly exhilarated by it. The journey back from Venice had tired her very much, and though she had felt sure that a good night's rest coupled with a day or two of solid English food would set her up again, she still felt overdone and devitalized. She was disposed to attribute this in the main to the unnutritious character of Venetian diet, where, if you got a bit of veal for your dinner, that was as much butcher's meat as you were likely to see, while, to make up, there would be nothing more than a slice of some unknown fish and the half of a chicken that was no bigger than a blackbird. As for a nice fillet of beef or a choice leg of lamb, it was a thing unheard of. Yet she had not felt much inclined for the fillet of beef when it was accessible again. It seemed to suit her as little as the rice and macaroni had done. For the last week, too, she had had from time to time little attacks of internal pain. No doubt it was of no consequence, but it was a pain that she did not know and could not quite localize. Once or twice she had thought of consulting a doctor, a thing that Mr. Osborne had urged on her before the Venetian visit, but some vague and curious fear prevented her the fear of being told that something was seriously wrong, and that she would have to give up their London programme which she had planned so delightedly. That was a thing not to be contemplated. The London plans were, to her mind, part of the immutable order of things, and it was therefore essentially important that Mr. Osborne should not guess that she was out of sorts, for she well knew, if he had so much as a guess of that, he would have carried her off, by force if necessary, and not let go of her till he had deposited her in some eminent consulting room, with specialists dangling at the end of the telephone. But she had never been lacking in spirit, and it would be a singular thing if she could not be genial and hearty to all the world for a few weeks more. But what she doubted was her power of getting through the physical strain of it. She knew how tiring the standing about and the receiving was, and every day now she felt tired even before the fatigues of it had begun. If only she had a daughter, who could quite naturally take some of this off her hands, and let her sit down while the company were arriving. And then an idea struck her. Dora and Claude were intending to occupy the flat in Mount Street till the end of the summer. After that they would come down to Grota, and soon, please God, the flat in Mount Street would be too small for them, and what would be theirs? This elegant circumlocution was exactly the phrase that passed through Mrs. Osborne's mind, and when they returned to London again in the autumn, it would be to a house of their own in Green Street with place for a nursery. This, however, they were only going to take at Michaelmas, but Dora had written to her mother-in-law this very morning, and her innocent letter suggested possibilities to Mrs. Osborne, saying that Mount Street really seemed to be hotter than Venice, and dreadfully stuffy, which Venice was not. What if Dora and Claude would come and live with them in Park Lane till the end of July? She remembered how Dora had acted hostess down at Grota in the winter, and they might play the game again. But this time there would be a real object to be served by it. Dora would help her in the entertaining, which prospectively, as she planned it, had seemed so delightful, but now appeared so difficult. It was an excellent idea, if only she could compass it. The large Indian gong had already boomed through the house, announcing that lunch was ready, and next moment Mr. Osborne came into her boudoir, announcing that he was ready too. Venetian habit still lingered with him. "Well, lunch is pronto, my lady," he said, "but you're busy yet, and still at the plan of campaign for the summer. But in your plan of campaign don't forget the commissariat, and here's your Lieutenant Marie come to tell you that my lady is served. Balls, concerts, dinners, balls, concerts. My lady is a regular Whiteley to the élite, she gives them all theirs to be had. You'll be pauperizing the dukes and duchesses, my dear, they'll be thinking of nothing but the amusements you provide for them." Mrs. Osborne was not without the rudiments of diplomacy, though, it may be remarked, nothing in the least advanced in that line was necessary with her husband. Still it was better that, if possible, he should suggest Dora and Claude coming to them than that she should. She laughed dutifully at Mr. O.'s joke about the dukes and duchesses, and proceeded. "I had a note from Dora this morning," she said, as they sat down. "Bless her heart," said Mr. Osborne parenthetically, "for what we are going to receive, my lady." "Amen, my dear. There's some of that rice with bits of chicken in it as I got the recipe from Pietro, and I could fancy a bit myself. Well, she wrote and said she was very well, and she'd been to call in Harley Street." Mr. Osborne again interrupted. "And was anything said about September?" he asked. "There was some mention of September. And there was something else, too. Oh yes, She finds that poky little flat in Mount Street hotter than Venice, she says. Well, then, why don't she and Claude take a cab round to number 92, and let the luggage follow, said Mr. Osborne rather hotly. Claude's not got a grain of sense. He should have thought of it long ago. If Dora feels it's stuffy and hot there, and suggested their installing themselves there, cool and comfortable. Bless the boy, all the same. But after I've had my lunch I'll get one end of the telephone and him the other, and see if you don't hear the front door slam and them drive away to Park Lane before I've lit my cigar. That'll suit you, my lady, will it? You'll like to have them dear children in the house, I know. Bless them, let them come, said Mrs. Osborne, and the longer they stop the better I shall be pleased. Dora will be a help too. She will help me with the dinners and what not. The two were alone on this their last day at Grota, but all 6 wasp-coloured footmen marshalled by Thoresby formed a sort of frieze round the table, occasionally changing a plate or handling a dish. Generous though he was with money, Mr. Osborne had very distinct notions about getting his money's worth when he had paid it, and since the house required 6 footmen he saw no reason why they should not all wait at table, even when only he and Mrs. O were having their lunch. Nor was the number of dishes curtailed because they were alone. Mr. Osborne always ate of them all, and because there was no company that was no reason why he should go starved. It was not, therefore, for nearly an hour after the time they sat down that he went to the telephone so accurately depicted by Sabincourt and rang up Claude. He joined Mrs. Osborne on the terrace a minute or two afterwards. Claude's willing enough, and thank you, he said, but he says he must speak to Dora first. So you'd better telephone to 92, my lady, and tell them to make ready whatever rooms you think right. Give them a nice sitting room, my dear, so that they can feel independent. Better hear from Dora first, said Mrs. Osborne. Just as you please, but when the girl says as the flat in Mount Street is hot and stuffy, and there's the coolest house in London waiting for her just round the corner, I don't see there's much call to wait. Well, my lady, I must be off. There's a committee been sitting in the Lords on the bill about the Employers' Liability Act, and I must get all they've talked about at my fingers' ends. Who knows, but Mrs. O, but that I'll be able to tell them a thing or two in that chamber before the summer's out. It's a strange thing to me how clever men, such as have taken degrees and fellowships at Oxford, should have so little common sense on other matters. As if there wasn't a difference between one sort of risk and another, and they want to lump them all on to the employer. I doubt most of them Liberals are either socialists or afraid of the socialists. But there, the noble lords have had a committee and I must see what's been said and done. Just to think of it. And have you got any idea about your new name yet? No, I dare say something will suggest itself. After all, I shall smell as sweet by any other name, hey? Law, my dear, said Mrs. Osborne with a slight accent of reproof, for Thoresby had come to see if there were any orders, and must have heard. The question, however, about this move of Dora and Claude to Park Lane was not so foregone a conclusion as Mr. Osborne had anticipated. Claude had gone to the telephone when he was rung up, and came back beaming to tell Dora of this delightful offer. Dad and the mater invite us to go to Park Lane till the end of July, he said. I'm blowed if there are many fathers who would want a son and daughter-in-law in the house all the time. Of course I said that I must consult you first, that was only proper. Oh, Claude, said she, of course it's awfully kind. But do you think so? But why not? It's just like the governor to have guessed that we should feel stuffy and cramped in the flat during this hot weather. Dora remembered her letter. I'm afraid I may be responsible for that, she said. At least I wrote to your mother yesterday saying it was very hot and airless here. Oh dear, I hope she won't think I hinted at this. Not she. You don't catch her imputing motives, especially when there weren't any. She's got more to think about than that. I say, Dora, are you sure you didn't have that in your mind? Awfully sharp of you if you did. Dora resented this. indignant that he could have supposed her capable of it, and a little of this indignation colored her words. "I'm afraid that I can't lay claim to sharpness," she said, "because the fact is that if I had thought such an offer was possible, I should have said it was cool and airy here." Claude's profile was outlined against the hot, hard blue of the sky outside, and Dora noticed how perfect it was. But she noticed it in some detached sort of way. It did not seem to concern her. At this he turned round, and came across the room to her. "What's the matter, dear?" he said. "Why is it you don't want to go?" "Oh, Claude, if you don't see, you wouldn't understand if I explained," she said. "And I can't quite explain, either." "Try," he said. "Well, I married you, do you see, and you are master of the house, and I'm mistress, and it isn't quite the same thing if we go and live with other people. They are angelic, of course, to suggest it. But oh, I wish people wouldn't be quite so kind, or, rather, that they would mix a little tact with their kindness. They've made it hard to refuse, telephoning like that. It's like a word-of-mouth invitation for a month ahead. You've got to say yes." Claude took up a rather listless hand of hers that lay on the arm of her chair. "Ah, then I do understand," he said, "and I love your reasons. I guessed it before you said it. You want to be alone with me. Well, it's the same here. But I've no doubt they'll give us a sitting room and all that." Though Dora had meant something very like that, it sounded rather dreadful to hear Claude say it, and say also that he had guessed. He oughtn't to have guessed, although he assured her it was the same here. There was an unconscious complacency about his guessing that she did not like. But he went on without pause. "As for its being tactless," he said, "I think you're rather hard on the governor. When a man's as kind as he can be, and as devoted as he is to you, I don't think you should say that." Claude stuck out his chin a little over this, and Dora, though she knew he was right from his point of view, knew that she had been right too. Kindness, even the most sincere, can easily be embarrassing. It needs refining, like sugar. But that was the sort of thing that Claude could not understand. The tact of good nature had been left out of him just as it had been left out of his father. So her reply was sincere. "Yes, dear, it was a pity I said that," she said. But somehow the admission was bitter. The truth was that it was a pity to say it, because she ought to have been more careful in what she said to him, not because the impulse that prompted her speech was a mistaken one. But all that was unconjectured by him. "My darling," he said, "you are so sweet with me. If I have to criticize anything you do, you never take it amiss. And now I'll tell you another reason why I think we had better go, apart from the comfort and convenience of it. It is that I don't think the mater is very strong, for all that she eats so heartily. She gets very easily tired, and she's laid down a program for the next 6 weeks which might well knock anybody out. Now it would be awfully good of you if you would help her with it." That appealed to Dora much more. "Oh, then, let's go," she said. "Telephone at once." "No, I think I will. I think Dad would like me to." "You think of everything," he said. "I hoped you would think of that. He'll be so pleased at your telephoning. 8003 Lewis, you know." Claude had a meeting at Brentwood that afternoon and had to leave immediately, taking a cab to the station and the train from there, so that Dora might use the motor if she wished. He felt that this was a perfectly natural and ordinary thing to do, but at the same time he had to tell her he had done it. "It takes but a very little longer," he said in answer to her urging him to take the motor himself, "and a walk from the station at the other end will do me good. I wish I was going to prowl about with you all afternoon. But men must work, you know. Though when I come back I hope I shan't find that you've been weeping. But you wouldn't like your Claudius Imperator to be a drone. Goodbye, my darling. I shall be back in time to dine and take you to the play." He lingered a moment still. "If you haven't got anything special to do, "You might go down to Richmond and have tea with Uncle Alf," he said. "He'd like it, and you haven't seen him for some time." "Yes, I'll go by all means," she said. "Thanks, dear. You see, after all, he gives us 15 thou a year." Dora ordered the motor, and set off on her drive to Richmond at once. The day was exceedingly hot, and the reverberation of the sun from the grilling pavements struck like a blow when she went out. A languid, airless wind raised stinging grit from the wood pavements, and the reek of the streets hung heavy in the air. She longed with an aching sense of physical want for the soft, dustless atmosphere of Venice, the cluck and ripple of its green waterways, and with no less an ache and thirst of the spirit for all that those things had once symbolized to her. Yet this last visit had not been the rapturous success of the one before. Venice was there unchanged, with the gold mist of romance that Claude had woven for her about it. But he, the magical weaver, or she, the woman for whom it had been woven, had altered somehow, and perhaps even in the enchanted city a certain vague but growing trouble that was in her mind would not be completely dissipated. In general outline she knew what it was, but hitherto she had not focused her vision on it. But now she felt that it had better be examined, for it cried out to her from the darkness of her mind where she had been at pains to hide it. Perhaps on examination it might prove to be imagination only, to have no real existence except in her own mind. And the trouble was Claude. It seemed to her ages ago, though in point of fact it was still scarcely 12 months, that she had told May Franklin that sometimes he said things that gave her a check. But it seemed almost longer ago, though it was only a few weeks, that she had sat alone one afternoon, when Claude was at Milan meeting his father and mother, and registered the fact that he again gave her checks. Between those two occasions lay romance, a golden dream, an experience which, common though it may be in this world of men and women, was none the less marvelous, miraculous. He, his love for her, and her love for him, had lifted life out of the levels on which it had hitherto moved, had made of it a winged and iridescent thing, which had soared many-colored into sunlight and moonlight. And that marvel, the enchantment of it, had seemed to her then to be a thing indestructible and eternal. While she was she, and while Claude was Claude, it could never change, nor shed one feather from its rainbow wings. Often had she whispered to him, or he to her, "It will be like this forever." More often had the tense silence testified with greater authority than any voice, even his. In those months whatever her senses perceived was glorified. She looked at the world through the radiance of love. That conviction that their romance would last forever was part of the divine madness of love. She saw that now clearly enough. She who had believed that they, and they alone, were different from all others, had not been truly sane when she believed it. She had been living in a world, real no doubt while it existed, yet not only capable of being extinguished but doomed to extinction. Once, before their marriage, she had talked to Claude about what she called the grey business of life, and he, she remembered, had given the grey business a facer, to use his words, by pointing to the example of his father and mother. That had seemed to Dora, already ripening for romance, to fall very short of the reply she wanted. She had wanted lovers' nonsense which would assure her that for them romance could never fade. But it had faded, it always faded. The question now was concerned with what was left. Did even the consolation of Claude's facer remain to her? Had she, to put her part of it baldly and brutally, got as great an admiration, respect, and affection for her husband as Mrs. Osborne had for hers? She knew she had not. Today she could look undazzled at the materials out of which her romance had been constructed and analyze them. It was made of her passion for beauty. She had fallen in love with his good looks. And she was getting used to them. She had got used to them. What else was there? What was left to learn? Now she had that by heart. There was a great deal left. So she told herself, but without emotion. There was his character left, which was sterling, his qualities, which were excellent, his kindness, his safeness, his to go to purely material things, his wealth, and his vulgarity. The word was coined. Her thought for the first time definitely allowed it to pass into currency, and she had to reckon with it. What a topsy-turvy affair it had been! How strikingly different a disposition from that which she had contemplated had come about. She had told herself that she must forever be in love with that beautiful face, that slim, active body, those deft, decided movements, and she had told herself that his vulgarities were things of no moment, things to which she would swiftly get used. But events had been evolved otherwise. She was used to his beauty, his vulgarities were cumulative in their effect on her. Instead of getting used to them, she was daily more irritated by them and more ashamed of them. She had imagined even that it would be easy to cure them, to eradicate them. But it proved to be a task like that of emptying a spring with a teacup. She had thought that they lay, so to speak, like casual water on the surface of the ground, a mere puddle that the sun would swiftly drink up. It was not so. They sprang from his nature, and came welling up bubbling and plenteous and inexhaustible. And there was something about them, so it seemed to her now, that tinged and made unpalatable all the good qualities in which he was so rich. You could draw a gallon of pure fresh kindness from that wellspring which was inexhaustible, but even before you had time to put your lips to it, and drink of it, some drop, quite a little drop, would trickle in from the source of his vulgarity and taint it all. It was even worse than that. There was a permanent leak from the one into the other. The kindness was tainted at the source. Dora did not indulge in these reflections from any spirit of idle criticism or morbid dissection. She wanted to see how they stood, how bad things were, and what chance there was of their righting themselves. They were no longer mere surface vulgarities in him, or so she believed, that got on her nerves. She no longer particularly minded whether he said handsome lady or not. What she did mind was the impulse that prompted him, for instance, to suggest that she might go down and see Uncle Alf because he gave them 15 thou a year. She minded his saying he had guessed the reason why she did not want to establish herself in Park Lane, namely, because she wanted to be alone with him. She minded the suggestion that she had written to say the flat was stuffy, in order to be asked there. It was all common. He judged her by impossible standards, standards that were inconceivable. And yet all the time he was good, he was kind, he had all the qualities that should make her love him, make her devotion an imperishable thing. As it was, they had been married scarcely 6 months, and already she knew that at times he so got on to her nerves that she could have screamed. Already, as she began to look closely at these things, she felt she was glad they were going to Park Lane. She was glad that limitations were placed on her being alone with him. It was a little cooler out of town, and Richmond Park was in the full luxuriance of its summer beauty. They had entered by the Roehampton gate. She had still half an hour to spare before the time she had said she would be at Uncle Alfred's, and she directed her driver to turn up to the left, past the White Lodge, and go round by Robin Hood Gate and Kingston Gate. A delicious smell of greenness and coolness came from the noble groves of trees, beneath the clear shade of which, knee-deep in the varnished green of the young bracken, stood herds of fallow deer with twitching ears and switching tails, warding off the persistence of the flies. All the sweet forest sights and sounds were there. The air was full of the buzz of insects, and hidden birds called to each other from among the branches. Distantly on the right she could see gleams of water, where the pen ponds lay basking in the sunlight, and the flush of mauve and red from the great rhododendron thickets above them. All the triumph of summertime was there, all the joy of the ripeness and maturity of the year, of the kindled and immortal vitality of the world. But for herself, though every day brought nearer to her the miracle of motherhood, it seemed as if summer had stopped. Once more she faced the situation as she conceived it to be. The time of romance, those months in the autumn were over. The red and gold of the autumn were withered from the trees. Brief had been their glory, which should have shed its light over many years yet. But, as far as she was concerned, what had made their flame was just the personal beauty of her husband. And out of them should already have sprung a deep and tender affection, the friendship which is not only the true and noble sequel of love, but is an integral part of love itself, perhaps even love's heart. But was it there? It seemed to her rather that something bitter had come out of it, something in which regret for the past was mingled with the gall of disillusionment. And even regret had but small part in it. Those months of gold seemed already unreal to her. She felt that she was regretting a dream. It was the same in little things too, for the little things all took their color from what had been to her then the one great reality. He had referred to himself, for instance, that very afternoon as Claudius Imperator, and it was with a sense of unreality that she remembered the genesis of that very microscopic joke. She had bought a Roman coin in Venice with that inscription on it, and had given it to him, saying it was his label in case he was lost. Today she could not conceive doing such a thing. She could not recapture the state of mind in which she did it, the impulse even that made such a trifle conceivable. In any case, the thing was one that might be said once and then be forgotten. But Claude had the retentive Osborne sense of humor. With him it was once a joke, always a joke, and from time to time, as today, he brought out the Claudius Imperator again. The Osborne humor had a heavy tread, a slow, heavy, slouching rustic tread, and a guffaw of a laugh. There is a spectator within each of us who forever watches our thoughts and words, and criticizes them. It may be called conscience, or guidance, or the devil, as the case may be. For some folk are gifted with a spectator that is their best self, others with a spectator which is but a parody of themselves. Dora's spectator was above the average. He was optimistic anyhow, and kindly, and at this point he came to her aid with, so to speak, several smart raps over her knuckles. Whatever was the truth of the whole matter, if, indeed, there is any absolute truth to be arrived at in the fluid and ever-varying adjustments of our relationships with others, only one attitude is compatible with self-respect. Namely, to find out and hoard like grains of gold all that is fine and generous and lovable in others, and do our best to find something in ourselves worthy of being matched with it. Instead of this, so said Dora's spectator to her now, she had, with acute and avid eye, been picking out all that in Claude seemed to her to be trivial or ludicrous or tiresome, and been finding in herself, to match it, intolerance and want of charity. There had been no difficulty, so said her spectator, in laying hands on plenty of those. She had but one word to say in self-defense, and the moment it was said she perceived that it amounted to self-accusation. She had fallen in love with his beauty. How could she not despond when she found that she was in love with it like that no longer? It had blinded her to all else. She had seen his vulgarities but dimly, if at all, even as she had seen his panoply of excellent qualities but dimly. Now she saw only the vulgarities, or at any rate she saw them right in the foreground, big and blinding, while behind, in the distance, so to speak, sat the rest of him. Was it not reasonable that her outlook, which must take its color from the past, should be pessimistic? And then even that piece of self-defense was turned into self-accusation. If that was the case, the fault had been hers from the beginning. But that was what she had done. She had separated him, the man, into packets. She had fallen in love with one packet, and now she was spreading in front of her another that only irritated and almost disgusted her. She had yet to learn the true and the wider outlook, to feel that fire of love that fuses all things together, and loves though it can tenderly laugh, and is gentle always, and rejoices in the weaknesses and imperfections and faults of the beloved, simply because they are his. For though there are many ways of love, the spirit that animates them all is just that. They are all swayed by one magical tune. But that Dora did not yet know. She had not heard a note of it. She did not even know the region of the soul where it made melody all day long. All that she had learned in the last few minutes was that she had with considerable acuteness been spying out causes for complaint, excuses for dissatisfaction. She could do a little better than that. By this time she had arrived at Uncle Alf's, and though the severe remarks of the spectator had partially braced her again, after the rather sloppy abandonment of self-pity and dejection into which her introspection had brought her, it must be confessed that there was something about Uncle Alf, caustic and malicious though he was, that restored her more efficaciously. For out of all the weapons with which it is fair to fight the disappointments and despondencies that are incidental to human life, there is none sharper or more rapier-like in attack or defense than the sense of humor. And Uncle Alf was well equipped there. Not even the picture dealer whom he habitually worsted would have denied that he had that. It was lambent and ill-natured, it twinkled and stung, but but it had the enviable trick of perceiving what was ludicrous. "And I hear poor old Eddie has been out with you and Claude in Venice, my dear," he said. "And I can't say which I'm the most sorry for you, or him, or Claude, or Venice." "Oh, why Claude?" asked she, for she had not thought of being sorry for Claude. "Because you had taught him probably to admire Tintoret, or say he did, and Eddie would want him to admire the railway station. He would have to trim. A very funny party you must have been, my dear." Dora laughed. Till this moment she had thought of them all as a rather tragic party, and the other aspect had not occurred to her. "Do you know, I expect we were," she said, "and all the time I took it seriously. I wonder if that was a mistake, Uncle Alf." "To be sure it was. There's many things in this world that will depress you, and make you good for nothing, if you take them seriously, and that cheer you up if you don't." That was not exactly wisdom out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, since Uncle Alf was a very old man, but it was a sort of elementary wisdom which a child might have hit on. And she felt that below the surface of this wizened, crabbed little old man there was something that was human. She had never suspected it before. In her shallowness she had been content to look upon him as a mask with a money bag. To be sure, he was devoted to Claude. She had not even reckoned with what that implied, not given him credit for the power of feeling affection. "I believe you are right," she said. "And when you're as old as me, my dear, you will know it," said he. "Lord, I've had a lot of amusement out of life digging for it. You understand, not picking it up. Poor old Eddie amuses me more than I can say. Why, his hair is turning grey with success and pleasure." "Ah, not a word against him," said Dora. "He's the kindest dad that ever lived." "I dare say, but there are things to laugh at in poor old Eddie, thank God. He and his Grota, and his Park Lane, and all. Did you ever see such a set-out, my dear? But Eddie in Venice must have been a shade finer yet. Tell me about it. He and Maria on the Grand Canal, and you and Claude, all in the same gondola, I'll be bound, so as to make a family party. This is the way we English go, good Lord. I wouldn't have been your gondoliers on a hot day, not even for the entertainment of seeing you all like Noah's Ark. Your gondoliers were thin men that evening, my dear, poor devils." Alfred had guessed the situation with the unerring eye of cynical malice, and his words brought the scene back to Dora with amazing accuracy. That day had depressed her at the time. She had never guessed how funny it was, and here she was laughing at it now, when it was a month old. Alfred continued. "Eddie among the pictures, too," he said. "A bull in a china shop would have been more suitably housed. Why, I nearly came out myself in order to see the fun. What a holy look there's about that, Maria," he'd say. Or, "My, I don't believe it would go into the gallery at Grota unless you took the roof off." And he wrote to me yesterday that he had bought a copy of that Housemaid Among the Clouds by Titian. What a daub, my dear, with a frame to match. It was too much for Uncle Alfred, and he gave a series of little squeaks on a very high note, shaking his head. "Eddie's a silly man," he said. "A very silly man is poor old Eddie, and he gets sillier as he gets older. What does he want with his Assumption of the Virgin and his 6 powdered footmen? What good do they do him? As little as my liniment does me. Lord, my dear, he says something too in his letter that makes me think they're going to make a peer of him. He hints it. I wish I'd kept the letter, but it made me feel sick, and I threw it away. But Eddie a peer, my dear. And I saw in a leader in the Times the other day that the Prime Minister hadn't got a sense of humor. I reckon they'll sack that leader writer if it's true that Eddie's going to have a peerage. Lord deliver us, Lord Saucepan, let's think of half a dozen names and send some picture postcards of Venice to Lord Saucepan, care of Mr. Osborne, Park Lane, Lord Lavatory, Lord Kitchensink. Fancy per two, an Honourable, and Mrs. Per. My dear, I hate that woman worse than poison. I should like to smack her face. She thinks she's a lady, and Maria thinks she's a lady. Why, Maria's more of a lady herself, and that's not saying much. To see Mrs. Purr and you talking together about art or acting would make a cat laugh. I wonder at your marrying Claude when you thought of his relations." Dora smiled at him. "But that's just what I didn't do," she said. "I only thought of Claude." "And well you might. My dear, I love that boy. He's got into proper hands too, you can make a lot of him. Lord Toasting Fork, Lord Egg Whisk, Lord Frying Pan." Uncle Alfred could not get away from inventing titles for poor old Eddie, and he did it with a malicious relish that was rather instructive to Dora. It could not be called kind, but it hurt nobody, and his frank amusement at the idea of the peerage was certainly better than the heart-sinkings with which the prospect of the event had inspired Dora when she thought of the genial pomposity with which it would be received. Throughout she had been too heavy, too ponderous. She had pulled long faces instead of laughing, had seen the depressing side of expeditions like the family party in the gondola instead of its humorous aspect. That was a hint worth attending to. She had got a sense of humor, so she believed, yet somehow it had never occurred to her to look at those spoiled days of Venice in a humorous light. Soon she rose to go. "Uncle Alfred," she said, "you've done me good, do you know? It is better to be amused than depressed, isn't it?" "Yes, my dear, and I hope you'll laugh at me all the way back to town, me and my greatcoat on a day like this, and my galoshes to keep the damp out, and a strip of flannel, I assure you, round the small of my back. I had the lumbago bad when first I saw you down at Grota, but the sight of those pictures of Sabincourts of Eddie and Maria did me more good than a pint of liniment. What a pair of guys! Lord and Lady Biscuit Tin." Dora laughed again. "How horrid of you," she said. "Well, I must go. Claude and I are going to the theatre tonight. And we are leaving the flat in Mount Street, Uncle Alf, and are to live in the house in Park Lane till the end of the season. Wasn't it kind of Dad to suggest it?" "Not a bit of it. You'll help entertain Maria's fine friends, half of whom she don't know by sight. Not but what I envy you. Maria's as good as a play down at Grota, and Maria in London must be enough to empty the music halls. She does too, so they tell me. She asks everybody in the London directory, and they all come. Goodbye, my dear. Come down again sometime and tell me all they do and say. Write it down every evening, else one's liable to forget the plums." Dora had given orders that their personal luggage should be transferred from the flat to number 92 during the afternoon, and on her return she drove straight to that house. Claude had already arrived, and was sitting in the big Italian drawing-room. He had had a most successful meeting, and was in excellent spirits. "This is a bit better than the flat," he said. "I went in there just now, and it was like a furnace. But here you wouldn't know it was a hot day. It's a handsome apartment. The governor bought nothing but the best when he had it done. And how's Uncle Alf?" "Very well, I thought, and very amusing," said she. "Oh, Claude, he had a greatcoat on, and galoshes. He is too funny." Claude did not reply for a moment. "Darling, I hate criticizing you," he said at length, "but I don't think you ought to laugh at Uncle Alf, considering all he does for us." "But he recommended me to," said she. "He said he hoped I should laugh at him all the way back to town. In fact, we talked about laughing at people, and he said what a good plan it was." Claude paused again. He felt strongly about this subject. "Did he laugh at the governor?" he asked. "Well, yes, a little," said Dora. "I hope you stuck up for him. I'm sure you did." Dora gave a hopeless little sigh. She wondered if Uncle Alfred could have seen the humorous aspect of this. Personally, she could not. "It was no question of sticking up for him," she said. "It was all chaff, fun." Claude got up, with his chin a good deal protruded. "Ah, fun is all very well in its right place," he said, "and I'm sure no one likes a joke more than me. But there are certain things one should hold exempt from one's fun. Dora tried the humorous plan recommended by Uncle Alfred. "Darling, I hope you don't consider yourself exempt," she said. "I am laughing at you now. You are ridiculous, dear. You take things heavily, and I do too. We must try not to. So I hereby give you leave to laugh at Mother and Austell as much as you like and me." "Dora, I am serious," he said. "I know, that is just the trouble," she said, still lightly. Claude's face darkened. "Well, it's a trouble you must learn to put up with," he said rather sharply. "I dare say I'm old-fashioned. You may call me what you like. But I ask you to respect my father. I dare say he and the mater seem to you ridiculous at times. If they do, I ask you to keep your humorous observations to yourself. I hate speaking like this, but I am obliged to." Dora felt her hands grow suddenly cold and damp. She was not afraid of him exactly, but there was some physical shrinking from him that was rather like fear. "I don't see the obligation," she said. "Perhaps not. It is sufficient that I do. Now let's have done. We spoke on the same subject, your attitude to my father, in Venice. Don't let us speak of it again. You say your say, and I am to make no reply. Is that it?" she asked. "Yes, that is it. I know I am right. Come, Dora." But the appeal had no effect, and for the moment she did not know how to apply Uncle Alf's wise counsels. "And if I know you are wrong?" she asked. "If I tell you that you don't understand?" "It will make no difference. Look here, the governor has done lots for you. You've never expressed a wish but what he hasn't gratified. Then ask him if he is satisfied with my attitude toward him," said Dora. "See what he says. Tell him that Uncle Alfred has laughed at him, and I laughed too. Tell him all." "I wouldn't hurt him like that," said Claude. Dora walked to the window and back again. She felt helpless in a situation she believed to be trivial. But she could not laugh it off. She could think of no light reply that would act as a dissolvent to it. And if she could find no light reply, only a serious answer or silence was possible. She chose the latter. If more words were to be said, she wished that Claude should have the responsibility of them. Eventually he took it. "And I'm sure we've all been good enough to your people," he said, "made them welcome at Grota for as long as they chose, and behaved friendly. And it was only 10 minutes before you came in that I wrote to Jim, telling him he could live in the flat and welcome till the end of July. I don't see what I could do more." The logical reply was on the tip of Dora's tongue, the reply that did not cost you anything, but she let it get no further. Only she rebelled against the thought that it was a kindness to do something that did not cost anything. He thought it was kind, and so in a way it was to give Jim the flat rent-free. He might perhaps have let it for £50. But he did not want £50. Yet he thought that it was kind, it seemed to him kind. It must be taken at that. It was no use arguing, going into the reasons for which it was no real kindness at all. And he had told her that now, she felt sure, to contrast his friendliness to her relations with her ridicule, so he would put it of his. But he had done his best. She was bound to take it like that, not point out the cheapness of it. "Claude, dear, that was nice of you," she said, searching for anything that should magnify his kindness. "And Jim will be an awful tenant. He will leave your books about and smoke your cigars. I hope you've locked them up." "Not a thing," said he. "He just steps in. He'll find a sovereign on my dressing table, I believe, if he looks, and a box of cigars in a drawer of my writing table which is welcome to. One doesn't bother about things like that." That was the worst. The parade of generosity could not go further than saying that there was no parade at all. Dora could not reply any more to that. She could only repeat. "It's awfully kind of you," she said again. We must go and dress if we are to be in time for the first act. Chapter 8. Though it was true that Claude's kindness in lending Austell his flat did not cost him anything, it conferred a great convenience on his beneficiary, and Jim, who had been living at the Bath Club, had his luggage packed without pause, and wrote the letter of acceptance and thanks to Claude from the flat itself on Claude's writing paper. The letter was quite genuine and heartfelt, or at the least pocket-felt, for Jim had had some slight difference of opinion with his mother on the subject of being seen in a hansom with a young lady who in turn was sometimes seen on the stage, and Eaton Place, where he had meant to spend those weeks, was closed to him. But Claude's flat filled the bill exactly. It was far more comfortable than his mother's house, and there was nothing to pay for lodging, so that it was better than the club. His satisfaction was complete when he found that Claude had left his cook there, with no instructions whatever except to go on cooking, nor any orders to have catering bills sent to the tenant. So Jim made himself charming to the cook, gave her the sovereign which he had at once found on Claude's dressing table when he explored his bedroom, and said he would be at home for lunch. Plover's eggs? Yes, by all means, and a quail, and a little macedoine of fruit. And by way of burying the hatchet with his mother, and incidentally making her green with envy, for it would have suited her very well if Claude had offered her the flat, since somebody wanted to take her house, he instantly telephoned asking her to lunch, and mentioned that he was in Mount Street till the end of July. The lunch she declined, and made no comment on the other, but Jim heard her sigh into the telephone. She could not hear him grin. As had been mentioned before, Jim had no liking for Claude, and up till the present he had done little living upon him. But this loan of the flat, especially since there was free food going, was extremely opportune, for at the present moment Jim was particularly hard up, having been through a Derby week of the most catastrophic nature. He had done nothing rash, too, which made his misfortunes harder to bear. He had acted on no secret and mysterious tips from the stables, but had with the most plebeian respectability backed favourites only. But the favourites had behaved in the most unaccountable manner, and their blighted careers had very nearly succeeded in completely blighting his. But he had raised money on the rent of Grota which would be paid him at the end of the month, and had paid up all his debts. That process, however, had made fearful inroads on his receipts for the next quarter, and strict economy being necessary, Claude's kindness had been most welcome. And as he ate his quail, Jim planned 2 or 3 pleasant little dinner parties. He would certainly ask Claude and Dora to one of them, or was that a rather ironical thing to do, since Claude would be paying for the food that they all ate? He would pay for the wine as well, it seemed, for a bottle of excellent Moselle had appeared, since he had expressed a preference that way, coming, he supposed, from Claude's cellar. Jim looked round the room as he ate and drank, pleased to find himself in this unexpected little haven of rest, but feeling at the same time envious of and rather resentful towards its possessor. He quite sympathized with the doctrine of socialism, and asked himself why it should be given to Claude to live perpetually in that diviner air where financial anxieties are unknown, where no bills need ever remain unpaid except because it was a nuisance to have to dip a pen in the ink and draw a cheque, whereas he himself was as perpetually in want of money. The particular reason why he was in this moment in want of it, namely because he had had a very bad week at Epsom, did not present itself to his mind, or, if it did, was dismissed as being an ephemeral detail. Perhaps in this one instance that was the reason why just now he was so absurdly hard up, but the general question was what occupied him. Claude was rich, he was poor. Where was the justice of it? He liked prints, too, and why should Claude be able to cover his dining-room walls with these delightful first impressions, while he could not? Indeed, he had no dining-room at all in which he could hang prints even if he possessed them. His dining-room was let to Mr. Osborne, who, it was said, was going to be made a peer, and on their walls hung the stupendous presentments of him and his wife. And Claude had married his sister. Everything came to those who had cheque-books. Well, perhaps the Ascot week would make things pleasanter again. He had a book there which could hardly prove a disappointment. If it did, but so untoward a possibility presented no features that were at all attractive to contemplate. He finished his lunch and then made a more detailed tour of the flat. It was delightfully furnished. Probably Uncle Alf was responsible for all this, since it was clearly out of the ken of any other Osborne, and everything breathed of that luxurious sort of simplicity which is so far beyond the reach of those who have to make sovereigns exercise their utmost power of purchase. By the way, he had taken a sovereign which was lying about on Claude's dressing table and given it to the cook. He must remember to tell Claude that, for Claude might remember, if he did not, and pay him. Next that room was the bathroom, white-walled and white-tiled, with all manner of squirts and douches to refresh and cool. Then came a second bedroom, then the dining room in which he had just now so delicately fed, then the drawing room, out of which opened a smaller sitting room, clearly Claude's. There was a big writing table in it, with drawers on each side, and Jim amused himself by opening these, for they were all unlocked, and looking at their contents. Certainly Claude did things handsomely when he lent his flat, for in the first drawer that Jim opened was a box of cigarettes, and one of cigars. These latter smelt quite excellent, and Jim put back the cigarette he had taken from the other box and took a cigar instead. In another drawer were paper and envelopes stamped with a crest, no doubt the outcome of the ingenuity of the Herald's College. In another a pile of letters, some of which Jim recognized to be Dora's handwriting. This drawer he closed again at once. It was scarcely a temptation not to do so, since he only cared quite vaguely to know what Dora found to say to her promesso. In another drawer were a few photographs, a few invitation cards, an engagement book, and a checkbook. This latter was apparently an old one, for it was stiff and full toward the back with counterfoils, while the covers drooped together halfway down it. Jim could not resist opening this, nor did he try to. He wanted to know, and there was no harm done if he did, what sort of sums Claude spent. But on opening it he saw that it was not quite empty of its checks yet. The last but one in the book had not been torn out, but was blank, as was also the counterfoil. Then came the last counterfoil, on which was written the date, which was yesterday, and a scrawled "Books, Dora," and an item of some £150. Then he turned over the earlier counterfoils. There was a big cheque to Daimler, no doubt for his car, another, scandalously large it seemed to Jim, to his tailor, more books, several entered simply as Venice, and several on which there was nothing written at all. Apparently, in such instances, Claude had just drawn a cheque and not worried to fill in the counterfoil. That again was the sort of insouciance that Jim envied. It was only possible to very rich people or remarkably careless ones, whereas he was poor, but remarkably careful as to the payment of money. The blank cheque, forgotten apparently, for the chequebook, tossed away with a heap of old invitation cards, looked as if it was thought to be finished with, was an instance the more of this enviable security about money matters. And Jim felt more socialistic than ever. He shut the drawer up, and examined the rest of the room, having lit the cigar which he had taken from the box and which he found to be as excellent to the palate as it was to the nostril. The room reeked of quiet opulence. There was a bookcase full of well-bound volumes, a pianola of the latest type, 2 or 3 more prints, the overflow from the dining room, and a couple of Empire armchairs, in which comfort and beauty were mated, and on the floor was an Aubusson carpet. And though feeling envious and socialistic, Jim felt that it would be quite possible to be very comfortable here for the next 6 or 7 weeks. Like most people who have suffered all their lives from want of money, and have yet managed to live in a thoroughly extravagant manner, Jim had been so often under obligations to others that heaven, suiting, we must suppose, the back to the burden, had made him by this time unconscious of such. He accepted such offers as this of the flat with a gay light-heartedness that was not without its charm, and made also the undoubted difficulty of conferring, no less than accepting, a favour gracefully easy to the giver. But he did not like Claude, and had a sufficiently firm conviction that Claude did not like him, to take the edge off his enjoyment. Why Claude should not like him, he could not tell. He had always been more than pleasant to his brother-in-law, and when they met, they always, owing to a natural and easy knack of volubility which Jim possessed, got on quite nicely together. This minute inspection of the flat had taken Jim some time, and when it was completed he strolled out to pay a call or two, see if there was any racing news of interest, and go round to the Osbornes to have a talk to Dora, whom he had not seen since she had returned from Venice, and in person express his gratitude for the timely gift of the flat. He found her in, but alone, Mr. and Mrs. Osborne were expected that afternoon. It was really extremely kind of Claude to think of it, he said, and most opportune. I had the rottenest Epsom, and really was at my wit's end. You are probably beginning to forget what that means. Oh, by the way, I found a sovereign of Claude's on his dressing table and gave it to the cook in order to promote good feeling, or was it 10 shillings? Dora laughed. This was characteristic of Jim, but she was used to it, and did not make sermon to him. I feel quite certain it was a sovereign, Jim, she said. I will bet, if you like. We will ask the cook what you gave her. I dare say you are right. Ah, you expect Claude, though. I will give it him when he comes in. Have you seen Mother? She and I are not on terms just now. But it does not matter, as I have Claude's flat. What have you been doing? Nothing. She did it all. I hadn't the least wish to cut her. In fact, I wanted to stay in Eaton Place, until the flat came along, and when it did, I wished to give her a slice of my luck, and I asked her to lunch. She said no, but sighed. The sigh was not about lunch but about the flat. She would have liked it. By Jove, Dora, you're nicely housed here. It's a neat little box, as Mr. O would say. Dora gave a short laugh, not very merry in tone. Ah, that's one of the things we mustn't say, she observed. I've been catching it from Claude. He says he's respectful to my family, but I'm not respectful to his. Jim paused with his cup in his hand. Been having a row? He asked. Make it up at once. Say you were wrong. But I wasn't, said she. That doesn't matter. What does matter is that you should let the purse holders have everything all their own way. Then everything slips along easily and comfortably. Oh, money, she said. Who cares about the money? Jim opened his eyes very wide. I do very much, he said, and so did you up till a year ago. It is silly to say that money doesn't matter just because you have a lot. It's only the presence of a lot that enables you to say so. Yes, that's true, she said, and it adds to one's pleasure. But it doesn't add to one's happiness, not one jot. I'm just as capable of being unhappy now as ever I was. Not that I am unhappy in the least. Jim nodded sympathetically. You look rather worried, he said. So you've been having a bit of a turn-up with Claude. That's the worst of being married. If I have a shindy with anyone I walk away, and unless the other fellow follows, the shindy stops. But you can't walk away from your husband. Dora was silent a moment, considering whether she should talk to her brother about these things which troubled her or not. She had tried to find a solution for them by herself, but had been unable, and she had a great opinion of his practical shrewdness. It was not likely that he would suggest anything fine or altruistic because he was not of that particular build, but he might be able to suggest something. Yes, we've been having a bit of a turn-up, as you call it, she said. That doesn't matter so much, but what bothers me rather is our totally different way of looking at things. I'm awfully fond of Dad, I am really, but it would be childish if I pretended that I don't see well humorous things about him. You see, one has either to be amused by such things. I only learned that yesterday from Uncle Alf, or else take them tragically. At Venice I took them tragically. I thought it dreadful that he liked to see the sugar factory better than anything else. And if it isn't dreadful, it's got to be funny. It's either funny or vulgar. There's nothing else for it to be. And then Claude, oh, dear. I told him he was at liberty to laugh at you and Mother as much as he chose, but he didn't appear to want to. I don't think he's got any sense of humor. There are heaps and heaps of ridiculous things about you both. Good gracious. You never thought he had any sense of humor, did you? Asked Jim earnestly. I don't know. I don't think I thought about it at all. And that's not the worst. Jim put his head on one side, and Dora's estimate of his shrewdness was justified. "Do you mean that you are beginning to mind about his being a not quite?" he asked delicately. Dora nodded. "Yes, that's it," she said. "What a pity. I hoped you wouldn't mind. You appeared not to at first. One hoped you would get used to it before it got on your nerves. Can't you put it away, wrap it up and put it away?" "Do you suppose I keep it in front of me for fun?" she asked. "Oh, Jim, is it beastly of me to tell you? There's really no one else to tell. I couldn't tell Mother because she's not very helpful about that sort of thing, and talks about true nobility being the really important thing, that and truth and honor and kindness. That is such parrot talk, you know. It is just repeating what we have all heard a million of times. No doubt it is true, but what if one can't realize it? I used always to suppose Shakespeare was a great author, till I saw Hamlet, which bored me. And I had to tell somebody. What am I to do?" "Why, apply to Claude what you've been saying about Mr. Osborne," said he. "There are things about him which are dreadful unless you tell yourself they are funny. Well, tell yourself they are funny. I hope they are. Won't that help?" "I don't know. Perhaps it might. But there are things that are funny at a little distance which cease to amuse when they come quite close. Uncle Alf made me think that the humorous solution would solve everything. But it doesn't really. It only solves the things that don't really matter." Dora dined quietly at home that night with Mr. and Mrs. Osborne and Claude, and after dinner had a talk to her mother-in-law while the other two lingered in the dining room. "Why, it was like seeing a fire through the window to welcome you when you got home of a cold evening," said Mrs. Osborne cordially. "To see your face at the head of the stairs, my dear. Mr. Osborne's been wondering all the way up whether you and Claude would be dining at home tonight. Bless you, if is said it once is said it 50 times. "I love being wanted," said Dora quickly. "Well, it's wanted that you are, by him and me and everyone else. And, my dear, I'm glad to think you'll be by my elbow at all my parties, to help me, and say who's who. And we lead off tomorrow with a big dinner. There's 30 to table and a reception after, just to let it be known as how the house is open again, and all and sundry will be welcome. Of course, you'll have your own engagements as well, my dear, and many of them, I'm sure, and no wonder, and there's nothing I wish less than to stand in the way of them. But whenever you've an evening to spare, you give a thought to me, and say to yourself, 'Well, if I'm wanted nowhere else, there's Mother'll be looking out for me at the head of the stairs.'" Dora laughed. "I accept your invitations to all your balls, and all your concerts, and as many as possible of your dinners," she said. "You'll get sick of the sight of my face before the season is over." "That I never shall, my dear," said Mrs. Osborne, "nor afterward, neither. And you'll come down to Grota, won't you, after July, and stay quiet there till the little blessed one comes, if you don't mind my alluding to it, my dear, as I'm going to be its grandmother, though it's a thing I never should do if there was anybody else but you and me present. Lord, and it seems only yesterday that I was expecting my own firstborn, and Mr. O. in such a taking as you never see, and me so calm and all, just longing for my time to come, and thinking nothing at all of the pain, for such as there is don't count against seeing your baby. But you leave Claude to me, and I'll pull him through. Bless him, I warrant he'll need more cheering and comforting than you. And are you sure your rooms are comfortable here, dearie? I thought the suite at the back of the house would be more to your liking than the front, being quieter, for, to be sure, if you are so good as to come and keep us old folks company, the least we can do is to see that you have things to your taste and don't get woke by those roaring motor buses or the stream of vegetables for the market." "But they are delightful," said Dora. "They've given me the dearest little sitting room with bedroom and bathroom all together." Mrs. Osborne beamed contentedly. She had had a couple of days without any return of pain, and as she said, she had had a better relish for her dinner tonight than for many days. "Well, then, let's hope we shall all be comfortable and happy," she said. "And I don't mind telling you now, my dear, that I've been out of sorts and not up to my victuals for a fortnight past. But today I feel hearty again, though I get tired easily still. But don't you breathe a word of that, promise me, to Mr. Osborne or Claude, for what with the honour as is going to be done to Mr. O, and the thought of his grandchild getting closer, and him back to work again, which, after all, suits him best, I wouldn't take the edge off his enjoyment if you were to ask me on your bended knees, which I should do, if he thought I was out of sorts. Lord, there he comes now, arm in arm with Claude. I declare he's like a boy again, with the thought of all as is coming. The evening of the next day, accordingly, saw, with flare of light and blare of band, the beginning of the hospitalities of number 92 Park Lane, the doors of which, so it appeared to Dora, were never afterward shut day or night, except during the weekends when the doors of Grota flew open and the scene of hospitality changed to that of the country. Yet cordial though it all was, it was insensate hospitality gone mad. Had some hotel announced that anyone of any consequence could dine there without charge, and ask friends to dine on the same easy terms, such an offer would have diverted the crowds of carriages from Park Lane, and sent them to the hotel instead. Full as her programme originally was, Mrs. Osborne could not resist the pleasure of added hospitalities, and little dances, got up in impromptu fashion with much telephoning and leaving of cards, were wedged in between the big ones, and became big themselves before the night arrived. Scores of guests, utterly unknown to their hosts, crowded the rooms, and for them all, known and unknown alike, Mrs. Osborne had the same genial and genuine cordiality of welcome. It was sufficient for her that they had crossed her threshold and would drink Mr. O.'s champagne and eat her capons. She was glad to see them all. She had a shocking memory for faces, but that made no difference, since nothing could exceed the geniality of her greeting to those whom she had never set eyes on before. It was a good moment, too, when, not so long after the beginning of her hospitalities, her secretary, whose duty it was to enter the names of all callers in the immense volume dedicated to that purpose, reported that a second calling book was necessary, since the space allotted to the letters with which the majority of names began was full. She could not have imagined a year ago that this would ever happen, yet here at the beginning of her second season only, more space had to be found. And Dora's name for the second volume, supplement to the Court Guide, was most gratifying. Alf's allusion to the London Directory, though equally true, would not have been so satisfactory. But her brave and cheerful soul needed all its gallantry, for it was an incessant struggle with her to conceal the weariness and discomfort which were always with her, and which she was so afraid she would, in spite of herself, betray to others. There were days of pain, too, not as yet very severe, but of a sort that frightened her, and her appetite failed her. This she could conceal, without difficulty for the most part, since the times were few on which her husband was not sitting at some distance from her, with many guests intervening. But once or twice when they were alone she was afraid he would notice her abstention, and question her. Her high colour also began to fade from her cheeks and lips, and she made one daring but tremulous experiment with rouge and lip salve to hide this. She sent her maid out of the room before the attempt, and then applied the pigments, but with disastrous results. "Law, Mr. O. will think it's some woman of the music halls instead of his wife," she said to herself, and wiped off again the unusual brilliance. But though sometimes her courage faltered, it never gave way. She had determined not to spoil these weeks for her husband. It was to be a blaze of triumph. Afterward she would go to the doctor and learn that she had been frightening herself to no purpose, or that there was something wrong. And those endless hospitalities, this stream of people who passed in and out of the house, though they tired her, they also served to divert her and take her mind off her discomforts and alarms. She had to be in her place, though Dora took much of the burden of it off her shoulders, to shake hands with streams of people and say, which was perfectly true, how pleased she was to see them. Friends from Sheffield, for she never in her life dropped an old acquaintance, came to stay, and the pleasurable anticipation she had had of letting them see a bit of real London life fell short of the reality. Best of all, Sir Thomas and Lady Ewart were in the house when the list of honours appeared in the paper. It happened dramatically, and the drama of it was planned and contrived by Claude. He came down rather late to breakfast, having given orders that this morning no papers were to be put in their usual place in the dining room, and went straight up to his father. "Good morning, my lord," he said. "Hey, what?" said Mr. Osborne. "Poking your fun at me, are you?" "There's something about you in the papers, my lord." "Well, I never. Let's see," said Mr. Osborne. He unfolded the paper Claude had brought him. "My lady," he said across the table to his wife, "this'll interest you. List of honours. Peerages, Edward Osborne, Esquire, MP." It was a triumphant success. Sir Thomas actually thought that it was news to them both, and went so far as to lay down his knife and fork. "Bless my soul," he said. "Well, I'm sure there never was an honour more deservedly won, nor what will be more dignifiedly worn." Mr. Osborne could not keep it up. "Well, well," he said, "of course we've known all along, but Claude would have his joke and pretend it was news to us. Thank ye, Sir Thomas, I'm sure. Maria, my dear, I'm told your new coronet's come home. Pass it to my lady, Claude." As if by a conjuring trick, he produced from under the tablecloth an all-round tiara of immense diamonds, which had been previously balanced on his knees. Mrs. Osborne had had no idea of this. That part of the ceremony had been kept from her. "Put it on, Maria, my dear," he said, "and if there's a peeress in the land as better deserves her coronet than you, I should be proud to meet her. Let the Honourable Claude settle it comfortable for you, my dear. Claude, my boy, I'm jealous of you because you're an honourable, which is more than your poor old dad ever was." The deft hands of the Honourable adjusted the tiara for her, and she got up to salute the donor. "If it isn't the measure of my head exactly," she said. "Well, I never, and me not knowing a word about it." Meantime, as June drew to its close, in this whirl of engagements and socialities, the estrangement between Dora and Claude grew, though not more acute in itself, more of a habit, and the very passage of time, instead of softening it, rendered it harder to soften. Had they been alone in their flat, it is probable that some intolerable moment would have come, breaking down that which stood between them, or in any case compelling them to talk it out, or, a thing which would have been better than nothing, bringing this cold alienation up to the hot level of a quarrel, which could have been made up, and which when made up might have carried away with it much of the cause of this growing constraint. As it was, there was no quarrel, and thus there was nothing to make up. Claude, on his side, believed that his wife still rather resented certain remarks he had made to her at Venice and here on the subject of her attitude toward his father, contrasting it unfavorably with the appreciation and kindness which his family had shown hers. In his rather hard, thoroughly well-meaning and perfectly just manner he examined and re-examined any cause of complaint which she could conceive herself to have on the subject, and entirely acquitted himself of blame. He did not see that he could have done differently. He had not been unkind, only firm, and his firmness was based upon his sense of right. But in this examination he, of course, utterly failed to recognize the real ground of the estrangement, which was, as Dora knew, not any one particular speech or action of his, but rather the spirit and the nature which lay behind every speech, every action. This she was incapable of telling him, and even if she had been able to do so, no good end would have been served by it. She had married him, not knowing him, or at the least blinded by superficialities, and now, getting below those, or getting used to them, she found that there were things to which she could not get used, but which, on the contrary, seemed to her to be getting every day more glaringly disagreeable to her. He, not knowing this, did his best to remove what he believed had been the cause of their estrangement by praise and commendation of what he called to himself her altered behavior. For there was no doubt whatever that now, at any rate, Dora was behaving delightfully to his parents. She took much of the work of entertaining off Mrs. Osborne's hands, made but few engagements of her own, in order to be more actively useful in the house, and was in every sense the most loyal and dutiful of daughters-in-law. She also very gently and tactfully got leave to revise Mrs. Osborne's visiting list, and drew a somewhat ruthless lead pencil through a considerable number of the names. For in the early days to leave a card meant, as a matter of course, to be asked to the house. This luxuriant and exotic garden wanted a little weeding. All this seemed to Claude to be the happy fruits of his criticism, and the consciousness of it in his mind did not improve the flavor of his speeches to Dora. They were but little alone, owing to the high pressure of their days. But one evening, about a fortnight after they had moved into Park Lane, he found her resting in her sitting room before dressing. "There you are, dear," he said. "How right of you to rest a little. What have you been doing?" "There were people to lunch," said she, "and then I drove down with Dad to the house. He was not there long, so I waited for him, and we had a turn in the park. Then a whole host of people came to tea, and I multiplied myself." "They are ever so pleased with you," said Claude, "and I'm sure I don't wonder. Ever since they came up you have simply devoted yourself to them." In his mind was the thought, "Ever since I spoke to you about it." It was not verbally expressed, but the whole speech rang with it. Dora tried for a moment, following Uncle Alf's plan, to find something humorous about it, failed dismally, and tried instead to disregard it. "I'm glad," she said, "that one is of use." Then she made a further effort. "I think it was an excellent plan that we should come here," she added. "It suits us, doesn't it? And it suits them." Claude smiled at her, leaning over the head of the sofa where she lay. "I knew you would find it a success," he said. "I felt quite certain it would be." Again Dora tried to shut her ears to the personal note this ring of how right I was. "It suits Jim, too," she said. "It really was kind of you to let him have the flat. May tells me she went to dine there last night. He had a bridge party." Claude laughed. "He's certainly making the most of it," he said, "just as I meant him to do. I think I'm like Dad in that. Do you remember how he treated us over the Venice house this year? Not a penny for us to pay. Jim's giving lots of little parties, I'm told, and Parker came round to me yesterday to ask if he should order some more wine, as Jim's nearly finished it. Also cigars and cigarettes. Of course I told him to order whatever was wanted. I hate doing things by halves. The household books will be something to smile at. But he's having a rare good time. It's not much entertaining he has been able to do all his life up till now." Dora sat up. "But Claude, do you mean his drinking your wine and letting you pay for all the food?" she asked. "Yes. It's my own fault. I ought to have locked up the cellar, and made it clear that he would pay for his own chickens. As a matter of fact, it never struck me that he wouldn't. But as that hasn't occurred to him, I can't remind him of it." "But you must tell him he's got to pay for things," said Dora. "Why, he might as well order clothes and, just because he was in your flat, expect you to pay for them." "Oh, I can't tell him," said Claude. "It would look as if I grudged him things. I don't a bit. I like people to have a good time at my expense. Poor devil, he had a rotten Derby week. No wonder he likes living on the cheap. And it must be beastly uncomfortable living on the cheap, if it's your own cheap, so to speak. I expect you and I would be just the same if we were poor." But the idea was insupportable to Dora, and the more so because of the way in which Claude took it. Generous he was, no one could be more generous, but there was behind it all a sort of patronizing attitude. He gave cordially indeed, but with the cordiality was a self-conscious pleasure in his own open-handedness and a contempt scarcely veiled of what he gave. And the worst of all was that Jim should have taken advantage of this insouciance about money affairs that sprang from the fact that he had no need to worry about money. Claude did not like Jim, Dora felt certain of that, and this made it impossible that Jim should take advantage of his bounty. It was an indebtedness she could not tolerate in her brother. "What's there to fuss about?" Claude went on. "If the whole thing runs into £150, it won't hurt. And, after all, he's your brother, dear. I like being good to your kin. Dora was not doing Claude an injustice when she told herself that his irreproachable conduct to her family was in his mind. It was there, he did not mean it to be in evidence, but insensibly and unintentionally it tinged his words. The whole thing was kind, but it was consciously kind. That made the whole difference. But it can't be, she said. If you won't speak to Jim about it, I will. It is impossible that he should drink your wine and smoke your cigars and have dinner parties at your expense. I can't let him do that sort of thing, if I can possibly help it. I would much sooner pay myself than that you should pay for him. My dear, what a fuss about nothing, said Claude. It isn't as if it mattered to me whether I pay for his soup and cutlet. No, that's just it, said Dora quickly. That's why you mustn't. If it cost you something, oh, Claude, I don't think I can make you understand, she said. Anyhow, I shall tell Jim what I think, and if the poor wretch hasn't got any money, then I must pay. Oh, I don't suppose he's got any money, said Claude. And as for your paying, my dear, what difference does that make? I give you your allowance and I wish you'd say you wanted more, for Uncle Alf's always wondering whether you've got enough and you want to pay me out of that. Well, it's only out of one pocket and into another. Don't fuss about it, dear. I wish I hadn't told you. But it isn't quite like that, said Dora. I could deny myself something in order to pay, if Jim can't. I can tell them not to send me the dress. And then the hopelessness of it all struck her. She was in the same boat as her husband. She could not deny herself anything she wanted, because there was no need for self-denial. And without that she could not make atonement for Jim's behavior. Nor could she say to herself that he had done it without thinking. Jim always thought when there was a question of money, for that he took seriously. It was only his own conduct, his own character, and other little trifles of that sort for which he had so light a touch, so easy a rein. He had been giving little dinners at his flat, instead of dining out, as he usually did. He would never have done that if he thought he was going to pay for the quails and the peaches. That he should do it was the thing that was irremediable, that, and the contemptuous kindness of Claude. Claude saw there was some feeling in her mind of which he did not grasp the force. She wanted to pay herself, or to think she paid, for Jim's hospitalities. It did not make a penn'orth of difference. He would pay a cheque into her account, which would make her square again, and she would never notice it. Just as you like, dear, he said, but you mustn't tell Jim you are doing it. He would think that I was reluctant to pay for his food and drinks, and I'm not. I can't stand being thought mean. There's no excuse for a fellow with plenty of shekels being mean. Oh, you are not that, said Dora quickly, her voice without volition following the train of thought in her mind. No, dear, I hope not, said he. And, believe me, I haven't got two ill feelings to rub against each other with regard to Jim. It's only by chance I knew. If there'd been another box of cigars in the flat, and a few more dozen champagne, Parker would never have come to me. As for the household books, why, dear, they'd have been sent up to you, and I bet you'd never have seen. No, it's just a chance as has put us in the knowledge of it all, and I for one should hate to take advantage of it. So cheer up, dear. Pay me, if it makes you feel easier, but don't say a word to Jim. I like doing a thing thoroughly, as I'm doing this. He lingered a moment by the door. Perhaps that clears things up a bit, Dora, he said, with a touch of wistfulness in his voice. And Dora tried to think it did. She tried also to put all possible simplicity into her voice as she answered. But what is there to clear up, dear? She asked. That's all right, then, said he, and left her. But once outside the door, he shook his head. Bottled simplicity, so to speak, is not the same as simplicity from the spring. He was quite shrewd enough to know the difference. He was shrewd enough also to know that he did not quite understand what had gone wrong. Something certainly had, and after his compliments to her on the subject of the admirable way in which she was behaving to his parents, he knew that it was no longer his strictures on that subject that made this barrier. True it was that during these past weeks neither of them had had much leisure or opportunity for intimate conversation, but there were glances, single words, silences even that had passed between them when they were in Venice first that had taken no time if measured by the scale of minutes or seconds, yet which had been enough to fill the whole day with inward sunshine. And he had not changed to her, that he knew quite well. It was not that he was less sensitive now, less receptive of signals of that kind. For his part, he gave them in plenty. Just now he had leaned over her, smiling, when she lay on her sofa, a thing that in early days would have been sufficient to make her glance at him, with perhaps a raised hand that just touched his face, with perhaps an "Oh, Claude," below her breath. Honestly, as far as any man can be honest with himself, he was as hungry for that as ever. He made his private code just as before, and no answer came. Something was out of tune. The vibrations, wireless, psychical, did not pass from her to him as they had done, and his own messages, so it seemed, throbbed themselves out, and found none to pick them up, but were lost in the unanswering air. Claude was of a very simple and straightforward nature, but he felt none the less keenly because he was not capable of feeling in any subtle or complicated manner. Love had come into his life, and his part in that burned within him still, in no way less ardently. He believed that Dora had loved him also, believed it, that is to say, in a sacred sense. It had been a creed to him, just as his own love for her was a creed. With body and soul he loved her, not fantastically, but deeply, and as he left her this afternoon it seemed to him that his love was being poured into a vessel in which was bitterness. They had talked only about what to him was a trivial thing, namely, the completeness with which Jim had made himself at home in the flat, but in the earlier days it made no difference what they talked about. Tenderness, love came through it all, like water through a quicksand, engulfing them. Their days had been passed in such a quicksand, they were always joyfully foundering in it. But now it was not so. Some bitter encrustation had come on it which bore their weight quite easily, and there was no risk of going through, nor any chance of it. Honestly, he did not believe that he was responsible for the formation of that crust. He had not changed, was not other than he had always been. Once for a moment his mind poised and hovered above the truth, and he half said to himself, "I wonder if she finds me common." But he rejected that. It was the wildest freak of imagination. Besides, she had not found him common at first, and he had not grown commoner. On the contrary, she had taught him much little things, no doubt, but many of them. He had noticed she was always polite to servants and shop people, and though a year ago his tendency had been to be rather short with them, as inferiors, he had instinctively followed her example. That was only one instance out of many. But, so the poor fellow told himself, they were all little things like that, which could make no real difference to anybody. Yet he thought over this a little longer. He himself, for instance, had always known that his father and mother and pa were, so to speak, common beside him. That seemed perfectly natural, for he had been sent to Eton and Oxford, and had picked up all sorts of things as to the way gentlemen behaved, which they did not know. He would not press his guests to have more wine, as his father did, when they had refused, nor tempt them to a second helping, as his mother did. There were little tricks of language, too, infinitesimal affairs, but he, so he thought, had got into the way of it, whereas they had not. He, for instance, never said law, as his father constantly did, and his mother, if she was not on the watch. But he said, "Good Lord," because fellows said that, and not the other. But what did that really matter? There was a certain boisterousness of manner also that characterized them, which he and Mrs. Purr, for instance, who was certainly a perfect lady, did not practice. Often, half in jest, his father had said, "Old Claude's getting too much of a swell for me," and though he deprecated such a conclusion, he understood what was meant, and knew that if half was jest, half was serious. But all this made it the more impossible that Dora should find him common. Eton and Oxford, he felt quite sure, had taken all the commonness out of him. And how little it mattered! He saw 100 things, day by day, in which, if he had been disposed to peer and dissect and magnify, he would have felt that there was a difference between his father and himself. But how measure so small a thing? But what did that matter? He saw the kindness, the honor, the truth of his parents, and he was as likely to cease respecting and caring for them because of that difference as he was likely to cease to love Dora because once he had found a grey hair in her golden head. Besides, and his mind came back to that if she found him common now, she must always have found him common. But nothing was short of perfection in their early weeks in Venice. Once, on his way downstairs to be ready to greet Per and his wife, who were expected that evening, he half turned on his foot, intending to go back to Dora and try to get to the bottom of it all. But he knew that he would find nothing to say, for there was nothing he could suggest in which he had fallen short. And even as he paused, wondering if it would be enough that he should go back and say, "Dora, what is it?" he heard the sound of the hall door opening. That was Per, no doubt. He must go down and welcome him.